He watched the greatest heroes fall. When the liquidator carved through the front lines, Gray Lee felt the world end around him. Friends cut down, hope extinguished, until a stranger stepped from the ruin and saved him from oblivion. Kronos rewound the clock. Gray woke 15 years earlier in his hometown, given one final chance to change what once happened, to train, to prepare, and to stop the nightmare he'd failed to stop before. He returned smaller, wounded, but dangerous in ways no one expects. Bullies, a harsh dojo, and a relentless master become the proving ground where Gray sharpens both sword and will. Saria tests him, pushes him, then sends him on, because the boy must become strong enough to survive what's coming. An ogre nest reveals what the future taught him. Facing an empowered ogre general, Gray taps a fragment of the dark power he once used, enough to shock his master, and enough to prove that his knowledge of the past is real. Then the World Union Academy calls. Injured, tested, and mocked, he sits the entrance exam, only to be pulled forward by something older than reputation. The Divine Eye Special Admission. A boy who died once now walks with tomorrow's scars. This is his second chance, and he will not waste it.
Lately, I've had a strong addiction to watching manhwa and manga recap videos. Every single day, I find myself binging one after another, losing hours and days doing absolutely nothing productive. And honestly, it's getting out of hand. So, maybe we can make these viral videos too. I mean, look at the views, the growth, the community these creators are building. It looks simple, right? But that's a trap. You go down this endless rabbit hole, spending money, losing sleep, hiring editors and writers from Fiverr and Upwork, and still feel like you've been robbed. Because don't forget how emotional the YouTube algorithm can be with making videos go viral. It's unpredictable, especially when the market's saturated, competition's relentless, and somehow other creators are dropping 10-hour videos daily while you're stuck trying to finish one. That's when I realized something had to change. So, I built the solution, the Webtoon Narrative Suite, a complete one-click system that handles everything from cropping, script narration, text-to-speech, image processing, and full video generation in one smooth process. Save money, reduce hours of work, and have a tool that only gives you straight results. Click on the link down below and experience it for yourself. And if you want even more tools to supercharge your YouTube recap journey, visit my Ko-Fi and Patreon pages where I drop weekly new tools designed to keep you ahead as AI continues to steal our jobs. So tap in now before you get left behind.
Two students enrolled at the Magic Academy. They decided to face off against one another in a duel. The result caught everyone by surprise. Gray conjured an enormous sphere of magical ether, its size dwarfing anything his rivals could produce. Had it not been for the professor's timely intervention, the other student would have faced total defeat. When he glanced at Gray, confusion filled him as he tried to comprehend the source of Gray's newfound strength. No student in the past had ever displayed such powerful magic. In reality, Gray possessed the rare ability to turn back time, and his impressive strength was not something he had always owned. His journey began in this way. The ultimate showdown was about to begin, as the most powerful defenders of humankind faced each other on the battlefield. Their relentless adversary, a creature born of darkness. However, on this occasion, the focus shifts away from a celebrated, invincible protagonist. Rather than standing out, the main character simply carries out his duties with careful dedication, blending in as one of the many soldiers. As the smallest and weakest among them, he became an easy target, and a stray laser pierced right through his chest. The blow landed with such overwhelming force that he offered no resistance, simply allowing it to move straight through him. His story came to an end. As his life slipped away, he looked over the battlefield, seeing the motionless bodies of his comrades lying all around him. Regarding what was commonly referred to as, she believed it was the best. Many people wondered about heroes, considering what they truly were. They find themselves fiercely battling against the greatest enemy of humankind. The Liquidator. 4 courageous fighters stand among the ranks of heroes, all possessing their own distinct characteristics and extraordinary abilities that drew everyone's attention. Among them were individuals like him, serving as foot soldiers. They were used as expendable pieces in a dangerous game. The people resembled background characters in a game, lingering silently in the corner without saying a word. Their only reason for existing was to meet their end. He is overwhelmed with a sense of self-pity. He reflected on how minimal his involvement in the war had been, wishing he possessed a special talent from birth. Despite the incredible strength possessed by those heroes, none of them had any hope of succeeding. The Liquidator cuts through them with ease, as if they were nothing more than soft vegetables. With just one strike, the entire group was completely defeated. It became clear that the creature had only been playing with its victim from the very beginning. Humanity's destiny had at last been decided, leaving no room for change. Gray Lee believed that to be true. At that moment, he suddenly recalls how his heart has already been torn apart. Despite everything, he continued to survive. Suddenly, everything around him changed before he could react. He stands alone amidst the shattered remains of the ruins. Standing before him is a powerful entity capable of granting anything. There was no explanation explanation given for the events unfolding. The enigmatic stranger asserts that Gray's injuries have already mended. Amazingly, he managed to recover by relying on. He had always carried hidden abilities within himself, concealed beneath the surface. The entity continued by explaining that Gray possessed much greater strength than the Liquidator. He was the very person responsible for butchering those heroes, as if they were nothing more than livestock. Despite everything, he remains uncertain whether Gray is capable of controlling such immense power. For the time being, the entity shares a fraction of its own strength with the boy. It was barely sufficient to defeat the Liquidator. In the world outside of imagination, Gray's sword appears. Mysterious energy enveloped the character at once, a gift bestowed by the supreme entity. He immediately decided to test out the energy, eager to find out whether it was genuine or just an illusion. To his surprise, the power proved to be incredibly strong. The Liquidator was so impressed by Gray's strength that he offered him praise. It still fell short of what was needed. Gray prepared himself for another attack, but was suddenly met with a loud impact. He has been cut in two, just like all the others. Blood poured from his split body while, in a strange twist, the Liquidator offered him yet another compliment. He became the first individual to challenge the Liquidator so intensely that the Liquidator was forced to use his full strength. The Liquidator, however, is about to encounter an unexpected twist. Gray's determination remained unshaken, and the strange, dark energy continued to empower him. Where his legs had vanished moments before, a new lower body had emerged, shaped completely from swirling shadows. He wielded his enormous sword with an intensity reminiscent of black clover, creating a spectacle that captivated everyone around him. It was surprising to realize that anyone had the power to make the Liquidator hesitate. The opponent, finding himself out of choices, quickly conjured a honeycomb-shaped barrier in a desperate attempt to protect himself. Gray appeared so changed that he hardly seemed human anymore. He brought his massive sword down with tremendous force, causing waves of energy to ripple through the air from the impact. The shield broke apart, sending sparkling fragments flying in every direction. Mr. Cocky eventually found himself sharing a meal with them. The impact landed on them with its entire force. At this point, he couldn't help but question whether the creature he was up against was human at all. He wondered if Gray had survived at all, while at the same time, Gray found himself questioning whether the other boy was still alive. At this moment, the only thing that truly mattered was the battle unfolding. The opponent was incredibly formidable, showing a toughness that was almost unmatched. Despite the challenges ahead, the young man resolved to carefully analyze the situation and uncover his opponent's weaknesses. He refuses to rest until this threat has been completely eliminated. He swung his weapon wildly once more, prompting the unsettling figure to react. Golden blood, both unsettling and strange, oozed from the wound. Reacting to the situation, the odd figure unleashed an advanced technique, causing radiant wings to emerge from their back. He appeared to be tampering with time, causing the bright day to shift suddenly into darkness. The moon cast its light across the scene, shining down as if it were a divine spotlight from above. Gray found himself genuinely impressed by what he saw, openly acknowledging its remarkable quality. However, the result failed to unsettle his self-assurance. He accelerates as fast as he can. A sudden attack was aimed directly at the Liquidator's neck, intending to catch him off guard. However, the blade failed to penetrate as expected. Once more, a mysterious barrier surrounded him, preventing any harm. He began rambling incoherently, his words making little sense to anyone listening. According to him, within this realm of perpetual twilight, he was completely invulnerable. At least, that was what he insisted. He instructs Gray to raise his eyes toward the sky. He needed to find out exactly how much trouble he was in. The boy glanced upward, his curiosity piqued, and spotted a dazzling, star-shaped light shining with overwhelming brilliance. Suddenly, the object plummeted from the sky with the force of a meteor, striking with such power that it completely erased Gray from existence. The Liquidator emerges triumphant, gazing intently at the hollow indentation remaining in the ground. Fortunately, the enigmatic figure from before reappeared. He arrived at the perfect moment, ready to reverse the flow of time and return the young man to the past with a single purpose. Their mission was to protect the world from harm. The mysterious figure went by the name. It seemed he and the Liquidator shared a complicated past. No one, however, is giving them any details about what type it is. The focus shifted back to the young man at the center of the story. He slowly opened his eyes and became visible. After his regression, he found himself in a serene, leafy neighborhood. The area was tranquil, still, and strikingly picturesque. He soon realized he had returned to Village, the place where he grew up. But it wasn't just familiar, it was an earlier version of his. He found himself nearly 15 years back in time. It appeared that had honored his promise. Gray found himself transported to the past, given one last opportunity to rescue the world from disaster. Without warning, a sharp, burning sensation spread across his hand. As he glanced down at his hand, he saw fresh injuries and bandages encircling his wrist. Remembering this period, he realized it was when Belder and his group frequently targeted him, treating him like nothing more than a practice dummy. With this fresh opportunity to start over, it would be truly disappointing if he continued to be a target for bullies. However, it was clear that he stood no chance of facing those opponents directly. They were far superior to him in man's skill and strength. Looking back, the idea of defeating the liquidator now seemed almost unreal, like something from a dream. He needed to find a way to handle the bullies, or else he would be trapped in the same cycle of misery once more. It appeared that he just couldn't get a moment's peace, though perhaps his luck was about to change. He unexpectedly crosses paths with the very group he's been hoping to avoid. Standing before him are Belder and his gang. Recently, boredom had taken hold of them, so they set out in search of their usual target, determined to keep up their time-honored routine of relentless teasing, as if it had become a sacred ritual for them. A spare sword landed by his feet, thrown toward him. The thug demanded that the boy pick up the sword, but confusion filled his eyes as he looked at the weapon. He remained unaware of the thug's intentions, unable to piece together their plan. 15 years had passed, leaving his memories faint and unclear. Belder, suspecting that Gray is only acting ignorant, decides to help by gently reminding him about the practice fights they usually have. Upon hearing the invitation, Gray attempts to dismiss the persistent group, gesturing toward his bandaged hand. He appreciates their offer, but explains he must decline, as his hand is still recovering from an injury. It seemed that the only way for Bro to get rid of the persistent vagrants was to grab a sword and face them in combat. They went so far as to promise him that the swords were completely dull, insisting there was almost no risk of injury. Despite the reassurances, Gray remained uneasy about the risk of getting hurt. Even if the sword had no edge, it was still solid metal. A single misplaced strike could be fatal. It was a fair concern. Just a light blow to a sensitive area could leave someone writhing on the floor, overwhelmed by agony. However, the group appeared unable to grasp the reasoning behind Gray's explanation. Belder positions himself with determination, preparing to attack. A surge of irritation rises in him whenever Gray refuses his requests. Without hesitation, he lunged forward with the fury of a wild bull, signaling the beginning of their duel. Although Gray had a brief moment to reach for his sword, Belder was already rushing toward him before he could fully prepare. The boy couldn't help but think it was absurd for the guy to claim it was just a mock battle, especially when he came rushing forward with the fury of someone angry at his own mother. At that moment, Gray recalled advice from a military doctor he had met in the past. The doctor had once explained that Gray's lack of progress in swordsmanship was due to a childhood injury. As he reflected on the past, he wondered if this was the very injury that had altered his entire life and condemned him to live as an outcast. Belder swung his sword down with force, but Gray moved so quickly that he became a blur, easily avoiding the attack. Even Gray can hardly believe he was able to avoid the attack. Belder's expression grew tense with irritation as he observed the remarkable nimbleness on display. He launched another powerful strike, but the narrator's ally swiftly avoided the attack once more. A swift attack targeting his feet is effortlessly dodged as well. The relentless pursuers were putting in every effort to catch up to their target. He moved with relentless purpose, his eyes fixed on his rival as if nothing would stop him from achieving victory. Gray moved with a swift, unpredictable agility, darting past obstacles as if powered by an unstoppable burst of energy. Initially, Gray assumed that Belder was simply moving sluggishly. However, it soon dawned on him that Belder's speed hadn't changed at all. Instead, Gray himself had become quicker. Now, Gray was avoiding every attack with such agility, it seemed as if he was desperately trying to escape a debt collector. Belders found themselves unable to look away from the scene unfolding before them. Gray seemed like an entirely new individual. Although his physical strength had faded, the recollections of every fight he had ever faced remained vivid in his mind. All of that hard-earned knowledge was still carefully stored within him. Gray's movements seemed automatic, as if he didn't need to think to avoid the incoming attacks. Dodging each blow required almost no effort from him. To prolong the fight, which was starting to feel less like practice and more like a real duel, Gray seized the sword, determined to continue. Belder, consumed by his own arrogance, relentlessly pressed down on Gray with his dull sword, determined to overpower him. At that moment, the young man reached his limit. For the first time, he raised his sword and struck. Belder's hand throbbed with pain after the forceful swing, a clear sign of his own weakness. Gray couldn't help but admit to himself that fighting someone so feeble made him feel like the real loser. Still, he couldn't find a shred of sympathy for Belder. After all, Belder was the one who had tormented Gray, stolen his opportunities, and brought so much pain into his life. With determined resolve, Gray planned to give Belder a dose of his own treatment. With a swift motion, Gray disarms Belder, sending the sword flying from his grasp and leaving him defenseless. Belder experienced nothing but a deep sense of shame. Gray soon understood that this opponent was even more unskilled than he had anticipated. Sensing an opening, Gray decided to taunt Belder, making fun of how poorly he handled his sword. With just one swift strike, Gray knocked Belder's weapon out of his grasp and sent it soaring through the air. Despite lacking any weapons, the situation did not seem particularly troubling. Ultimately, Belder had confidently claimed that the dull swords posed no danger during combat, but Gray was completely losing his composure. The blade moved through the air with such speed that the blade sliced straight through Belder's flesh, making streams of blood pour from the wound. As the seriousness of what was happening became clear, Belder's legs gave out beneath him, leaving him unable to stand. For a moment, disbelief filled his mind. Gray had believed he wielded a dull blade, yet confusion struck him when he noticed blood beginning to flow from his opponent. As he examined his weapon, he realized it was dull. He understood that if the sword had been sharpened, the man before him could have lost his life. Without losing focus, the speaker reminded everyone to concentrate on the current situation. Gray moved the blade with careful accuracy. Several of Belder's teeth were knocked out, and blood poured from his nose in a relentless stream. The speaker's companion stood imposingly above their adversary, casting a dominating presence. The experience left him with a lasting sense of unease. Watching overconfident individuals break down and become emotional wrecks always brought him a certain amusement. It appeared that this experience would be sufficient to keep Belder modest for the remainder of his days. The realization hit that optimism had been premature. The troublemaker clearly hadn't figured things out yet. He commands his to capture the boy and beat him relentlessly, leaving him battered and barely recognizable. The thugs hung back, clearly reluctant to move closer. After all, they had just witnessed their leader get mercilessly defeated, and none of them wanted to end up the same way, even though they believed they could defend themselves if they tried. One member of the group nervously proposed that they all rush Gray together in hopes of overpowering him. The three opponents wasted no time and sprang forward, closing in on the boy from all sides. Gray remained as calm and indifferent as always. While their challengers seemed eager to risk everything, he stood fully prepared to face them without hesitation. All at once, the group lunges toward him, determined to put an end to him on the spot. Initially, Gray felt a small amount of pity toward the vagrants and chose to let them go unharmed, but it became clear they would persist in their behavior until they faced consequences. He decides to deliver the gutter goblins the justice they have earned. Soon afterwards, their faces puff up dramatically, resembling the bright red swelling of a baboon's behind after a particularly rough facial treatment. Gray couldn't help but find it absurd that the people who once terrified him now resembled nothing more than weeping emojis come to life. He remembered that this group currently trained as students at Swordsmanship Dojo. Belder confessed that they belonged to the dojo as students, but explained that they had not attended recently. They felt that the others, full of misplaced confidence, assumed they were strong enough already and saw no reason to continue their training. The expectations set for strength seemed disappointingly low, especially for someone who was meant to be capable. Still, Gray hardly held high hopes for the dojo to begin with. He expressed a desire to become part of the dojo and planned to use these troublemakers as his references. Declines the request, unable to picture what might happen if his master discovers that he suffered such a humiliating defeat. Gray is fully aware of the best way to handle these opponents. He brandishes his sword with confidence, using the display to strike fear into their hearts, suggesting the dire consequences that might unfold if their warnings were ignored. The speaker implied just how bad things could get. Surprisingly, the minor warning proves highly effective. Belder becomes not just humbled, but also energized by the recent confrontation, sprinting down the street with remarkable speed. Driven by urgency, he races toward the dojo at full tilt, abandoning his friends in his haste. After some time had passed, the group made their way into the town. As they strolled along, Belder wondered aloud about Gray's reasons for wanting to join a dojo. It soon became clear that Gray was interested because the dojo offered a special recommendation for entry into the academy. The boy felt confident that Belder was wise enough to grasp his true intentions without needing further explanation. One of the boys questions to himself why Gray would bother enrolling in an academy, considering Gray already possesses so much strength. To the others, he held his own standards, ones much higher than they could imagine. In his eyes, enough carried a meaning uniquely his own. He still recalls with striking clarity the day when every one of the world's mightiest champions was butchered mercilessly in an instant, even though they had been considered the greatest defenders of mankind. The so-called heroes stood no chance. Even he, armed with all his strange abilities, failed to leave so much as a mark on that villain. No one could say for certain how much strength would be required to finally overcome that villain. At that time, he still had a glimmer of hope left within him. As soon as he acquired those formidable dark abilities, an overwhelming sense of invincibility washed over him, making him believe he could obliterate anything in his path. He was limited by his insufficient abilities with a sword. He depended on several techniques he had picked up from the Sword Saint. He regretted not dedicating more hours to mastering the sword, wishing he had followed the Sword Saint's example. He felt confident that, on his own, he could have changed the outcome of the entire fight. It seemed probable that had sent him to this place, so he could work relentlessly, proving himself until he became worthy to control that enigmatic, shadowy power once more. After some time had passed, the group encountered the leader whom the troublemakers had mentioned earlier. The group is being scolded for starting trouble with an innocent bystander. To make matters even worse, after confronting that ordinary person, they ended up suffering nothing but an embarrassing loss. The formidable woman known as served as the instructor at the Swordsmanship Dojo. Belder attempted to explain that their intentions had never been to intimidate anyone. Instead, they had only only meant for it to be a simple practice fight. The unfortunate man suffers a brutal consequence for his deceit, receiving a blow so powerful it could have launched him straight to the moon. His trembled with fear, each one silently hoping to make it through the day alive. There was nothing for anyone to fear. The daring move she had just performed was merely her way of giving these troublemakers a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. They argued that attacking a defenseless person could be considered a mock battle, so by that logic, her actions should also be seen as a mock battle. With a swift motion, she aimed her sword at Belder's sneering face and forced him to leave the dojo at once. His cronies had no choice but to follow him out, sharing in his humiliation. With that, the group of hapless gathered up their defeated leader and shuffled out of the room, each step marked by an air of utter dejection. She spun around without hesitation and quickly settled onto her knees, sitting back on her feet. She offers an apology to her new recruit, taking responsibility for the difficulties her previous students caused him. The recruit, however, dismisses her apology without concern. Returning to the topic at hand, she mentioned having heard about his desire for a recommendation to the academy, and he confirmed that this was true. Because Belder and his less-than-stellar team had given him so many problems, she decided to offer her support by agreeing to write him a letter of recommendation. Before she allows him to proceed, she decides that he must first demonstrate his value. The two competitors faced one another, each gripping a wooden sword. As the more experienced participant, she graciously allowed him to make the first move. The battle commenced with both fighters launching into action, their movements so rapid that only ghostly afterimages remained in the wake of their powerful attacks. Throughout this time, remains focused on her task, evaluating how skilled the boys are. She observes that his way of handling a sword is unexpectedly skillful for someone so young, suggesting he might have already survived many fierce fights. Now everything became clear as to the reason behind their actions. The group had been completely overpowered by just one individual. Although he had largely developed his own techniques, there were occasional moments when his sword movements resembled those taught at the academy. It seemed evident that someone must have given him some instruction, even if his skills remained unpolished. However, there was no doubt about one thing. He possessed immense natural ability, waiting to be discovered and developed to its maximum potential. To her, it was as if she had uncovered a hidden gem amidst ordinary stones. Having carefully evaluated her opponent, she resolved to finish the duel by striking with one final, decisive blow. He steadies himself, preparing for what comes next. She skillfully deflects the attack without any difficulty. The eerie ritual commenced anew, with the young man deftly deflecting every strike she threw at him, as if taking a hit was something he absolutely could not allow. The woman begins to feel a wave of anxiety build within her. His unwavering confidence unsettles her, making every move she makes seem ineffective against his solid defense. No matter what technique she attempts, nothing appears capable of breaking his composure. Frustration even began to bubble up inside her, directed at herself. She found it ridiculous that she needed to put forth her full effort in a simple practice fight, all just to assess the abilities of this promising newcomer. She becomes so overwhelmed that a sense of fear begins to take hold of her. For an instant, he appears almost otherworldly, as if on the verge of releasing an immense dark power, effortlessly enduring the most recent attack from their opponent. She quickly understands that the movement was nothing more than a reckless attempt. Following the wild swing, Gray began to grow weary as his strength faded. The woman notices his downcast expression and assumes he has let his guard down, prompting her to spring forward with the agility and boldness of a determined cat. She realized she had been cornered with no way out. Suddenly, the situation turned against her, catching her off guard. The shattered wooden sword fell and clattered onto the floor. Gray felt completely at a loss, confused by what had just happened. For a brief moment, he had tapped into the deep, shadowy force that once aided him during his fight with the Liquidator. Realizing he had drawn on even a small portion of that same energy now made it clear that his powers remained with him, even after traveling back in time. Suddenly, a wave of intense pain overwhelms his entire body. The pain overwhelms him, forcing him down onto his knees. He struggled to stay upright, his strength failing him, while noticed his weakened state and grew concerned, feeling a strong urge to assist him. Despite tapping into just a small portion of his strength, Gray soon understands that his present form cannot fully demonstrate his skills. Despite the tremors running through his body, he gathers enough resolve to rise to his feet once more. He reassures her of his well-being, insisting that he is all right. Gray drifted deep into contemplation, suddenly aware that even standing was a struggle, a stark reminder that he would need to use his skills with utmost precision. He was also considering whether to share the information about himself. He directed his strength toward the season standing before him, while stared at him, completely bewildered and unsure of what was happening. At the same time, the boy calmly evaluated what had just occurred, and decided it was best to keep the incident to himself. He reasoned that no one else would even think of mentioning such a thing. No one would ever take his unbelievable tale seriously, especially since he couldn't summon his dark powers on command to prove his point. Keeping that thought, he quickly invents a harmless reason, claiming he just pushed himself too hard. The remained unconvinced, silently scoffing at his excuse and finding it utterly absurd. absurd. She knew it was impossible for him to have cut her wooden sword, especially since their sparring weapons were blunted. Her sharp mind quickly picked up on the fact that Gray was concealing something from her. Virgil's daughter aimed the broken remnants of her sword in the boy's direction. Gray noticed the change in demeanor and wondered if something was wrong. His measured response made it obvious that he was trying to keep his emotions in check. She realizes that, at the moment, he prefers to remain silent and avoid any conversation. Rather than questioning his choice, she acknowledges it and shifts the conversation to why he first wanted a recommendation for the academy. The young man affirms her assumption, explaining that he had heard she was someone who could assist him with the process. Makes no attempt to contradict him. She firmly points out that her influence alone is enough to secure him a recommendation to the Royal Academy of Swordsmanship, renowned as the finest school in their entire kingdom. At that moment, she revealed, quite unexpectedly, that she had no intention of encouraging him to enroll at that school. The speaker claimed that Gray lacked the necessary qualities to belong at the academy. Her icy remarks wounded him more deeply than any weapon ever could. Gray was consumed by self-doubt, questioning his own strength and feeling inadequate. He realized that throughout the entire fight, the only thing he could be proud of was his last desperate attack. Hadn't finished speaking yet. She went on to explain her point, insisting that rather than attending the Royal Academy, the children ought to enroll at the World Union Academy instead. The unexpected turn of events struck him with overwhelming force, leaving him more stunned than the hapless characters often whisked away by truck in stories. Despite the Royal Academy being the most prestigious in their nation, the World Union Academy surpasses it as the foremost institution globally. This school is widely recognized as the ultimate authority in the art of swordsmanship. Gray found himself speechless, realizing that this very magic academy was known for training the most powerful battle squad, which featured legendary fighters such as the Sword Saint Amy. He wastes no time in approaching, expressing his doubts about whether he truly belongs at such an esteemed school. Amusingly, the girl completely shatters his assumptions, making it clear that, in his current state, he has absolutely no chance of making it past the door. He is aware that Gray himself feels uneasy about his own weaknesses, particularly because of how frail his body is at the moment. This concern becomes even more pressing when thoughts of the Royal Academy arise. The boy's exceptional swordsmanship could make the impossible seem possible for him alone. However, at the World Union Academy, that simply wasn't enough. If he didn't dedicate himself to intense training, he would have no chance. Even couldn't hide her surprise. Despite possessing extraordinary skill with a sword, the boy's body remained frail and thin, resembling that of a stick figure. Uncertainty began to settle over Gray, causing real concern about the formidable rivals awaiting him at the World Union Academy. The challenge ahead was far from easy, and given the state of his body, even trying would be impossible for now. Observing how disheartened he appeared, remarked on his tendency to lose hope easily, reminding him that he still had a full 9 months before the Academy's entrance exam. Gray, still doubting his own skills, worries that even with more time, he won't be able to succeed. Even though tried to motivate him, she also admitted that the time available was simply not enough. Despite everything, she still gives him an opportunity. He urged him to place his faith in her for the next 9 months, warning that she intended to put him through unimaginable hardships during that time. A sense of certainty settled in as it seemed likely that she would enlist David, pushing the man to complete 3 ultramarathons and perform 6,000 pull-ups. Despite his reluctance to endure hardship, Gray acknowledges that he sees no alternative paths before him. He announced his readiness, silently wishing that the would guide him well. Finds herself drawn to his bold sense of determination. Initially, most people might assume that beginning with an upbeat attitude suggests promising things ahead. The mood shifted instantly to one of sheer terror when Virgil's daughter declared that his grueling training was about to start. Gray's ordeal commenced with relentless challenges. He pushed himself in training with an intensity reminiscent of and matched that effort by consuming large amounts of food. His mentor was clearly intent on forcing him into a period of intense muscle gain. On top of all this, Gray struggled with the strange meals he was required to eat. Despite his efforts, the teacher remained strict, challenging him with every possible test. Their sword matches went on without any change, each one just as demanding as the last. His intention was to improve his skills through dedicated practice. 8 months slipped by in the blink of an eye. During that time, Gray persevered through intense training and ultimately achieved a lean, muscular physique as a result of his dedication. Even found herself captivated by his impressive build. As they reached this point, she had exhausted every resource she could give him, and now he was prepared to face the challenges of the real world on his own. Gray found himself puzzled by her relaxed demeanor, especially since a whole month remained before the entrance exam. Virgil's daughter pointed out to him that the journey to the exam site would take up a significant amount of his time. For this reason, she explained, he needed to set out ahead of schedule. As a gesture of thanks, presented him with a pouch filled with coins, assuring that his journey ahead would be comfortable and his monthly costs fully covered. The students recognized what a genuine teacher she was. Meanwhile, the boy remained uneasy about leaving so quickly, feeling disheartened by her assertive manner. He felt as though his teacher was distancing themselves from him, treating him like an unwanted responsibility. She smiles in response to his words, silently believing that he is making things more difficult than necessary. Without warning, Gray mentioned the rumor about an ogre's nest in the area, immediately catching Sato's attention and causing her to feel uneasy. He observes that the absence of security guards has left the village dangerously unprotected. He also acknowledges that the nest exists, mentioning that it was found not long ago. As she smiled at him, confidence shone in her eyes, certain that everything would turn out fine. In her mind, even if the situation took a turn for the worse, she trusted they could always seek assistance from the royal capital. Gray feels a sense of unease. She believes he ought to concentrate solely on his exam, keeping his mind free from distractions. In his thoughts, he couldn't shake the belief that his teacher was deceiving him, offering false comfort just to keep him calm. He was certain that the royal capital would never bother to help a small, insignificant village like theirs. And when ogres eventually attacked, leaving the village in ruins, he felt his suspicions were confirmed. His fate was sealed. She would meet a violent end. In his first life, he discovered that she had perished while facing the fight on her own. He kept his thoughts to himself and quietly went along with what was happening. He expressed his gratitude to his teacher for the support and guidance received over the years. Gray intends to depart immediately, smiled at him, her two vibrant personalities silently cheering him on in hopes that he would succeed. Several days passed. She carefully made her way along the treacherous trail that led to the nest. All around her, the trees displayed grim reminders of past trespassers, human skeletons suspended as chilling warnings to anyone who dared approach. Used the scout's clues to search for the location of the nest. Noticing a streak of blood on the path in front of them, she sensed the threat that awaited her on the path. Yet before she could react, this attention was captured by the sound of her disciple's recognizable voice, which startled her. Perched high above, someone balanced carefully on a sturdy tree branch. He wonders about his dear master's destination at such a late hour. He entered unexpectedly, prompting her to question why he was there instead of concentrating on his studies at the academy. Landing firmly on the ground, he mocked her for daring to question him, insisting it should be the other way around. After all, she had deceived him by claiming she would stay out of the nest situation and allow the royal capital to deal with it. Offering an explanation, mentions that the royal capital declined to attend due to their own issues, so she decided to handle the responsibility on her own. She felt assured of her skills with a sword, convinced that no matter what creature waited inside the nest, she could overcome it, especially now that she had the scout's report. Explains to herself that she will be facing an elite ogre as the main enemy, with around 50 other monster minions supporting it. She realizes that battling so many creatures will be challenging, but she remains determined to proceed. Incidentally, even Gray acknowledged that an elite ogre lacked the strength necessary to overcome a woman as skilled as her. Despite their brutish appearance, ogres possess a cunning intelligence and rely heavily on their sheer numbers. With the nest packed full of them, faces certain death if they manage to encircle and overpower her. Aside from everything else, the young man possesses a single certainty he holds without a doubt. Due to the memories he carried from his past life, he understood that allowing to handle the mission by herself would almost certainly lead to her demise. If that happened, the village would be left defenseless and would eventually face destruction as well. He had already lived through that bleak future once before. Keeping this in mind, the young disciple approaches her and asks if they can work together. However, his master shows no kindness, making it clear that she is perfectly fine by herself. Gray decided not to argue about her abilities. Instead, he explained that his goal was to gain practical fighting experience. He subtly shifted the conversation, making her question whether she was worried he might slow her down. Despite his intelligence, his master highlights how absurd his recent statement was. At this stage, their abilities are so closely matched that she finds it challenging to compete with him during their practice fights. Despite acknowledging that point, cautioned her student that facing a true battle was a completely different experience, particularly when dealing with the danger of a monstrous nest like the one before them. The perilous nature of this mission made her reluctant to let Gray put himself in harm's way, especially since he still lacked sufficient experience in battles. Unwavering resolve left her disciple feeling shattered. Despite his pleas, she remained firm in her decision. Desperate, he decided to try one final approach and prepared to share his last idea with his master. Initially, she felt a sense of surprise. Gray finally confronted her, boldly inviting her to settle things with a fight. He assured her that he would help her rest, but secretly planned to confront the ogre alone. Tension filled the air as the disciple boldly confronted his master, daring him to face a genuine fight. Gray leveled his sword at her, silently anticipating how she would react, came to the realization that her student matched her own level of stubbornness, prompting her to concede. Not wanting him to continue by himself, she decided to agree with his earlier idea that they should go together. The only thing that mattered to her was seeing him come back safe and sound. Deep down, she truly believed that his safe return was not just a hope, but a certainty. Together, the pair joined forces and set out They ventured into the forest, determined to face the monsters that awaited them. As time passed, the night aged, and at last, the master and the disciple managed to uncover where the nest was hidden. The cunning monsters cleverly used the surroundings to help them. Their lair was designed so that anyone brave enough to enter would find no way out. Believed the creatures were sure of their own strength, but Gray felt differently, insisting that this confidence would actually put the two of them at a disadvantage, because it meant they'd need to fight with extra caution. From a secure vantage point, she finds herself unexpectedly taken aback. The boss is missing from the crowd, leaving her to suspect it might be concealed inside its tent. Since the circumstances favored the group, they would have the chance to defeat several before the elite ogre could engage them. Then explained her plan, directing her student to focus their attacks on the monsters from a single direction. As she moved to guard the opposite side, without hesitation, the plan was set into motion. Both individuals swiftly sprang forward, gripping their swords tightly as they prepared to engage. The battle starts so suddenly that the monsters don't even realize what's happening. The imposing figure of loomed above them, having already claimed the high ground. She aimed carefully and delivered a precise shot to the head. The creature's head hit the ground, bouncing and rolling like a football. After the first monster fell, the others began to growl and bellow to one another in their own tongue. The whole group becomes furious, instantly readying their weapons with the clear intent to eliminate the intruders. It made no difference, since the boy unleashed his full power, tearing through the horde with unstoppable ferocity. The young man single-handedly battled through a horde of monsters, slicing through several foes at the same time. Continued to move with grace, effortlessly displaying the remarkable abilities she had gained under Papa Virgil's guidance. Together, Gray and moved with flawless coordination, each seamlessly protecting the other and making them an unbeatable team. In just a matter of minutes, they had eliminated every monster in view, leaving behind only a trail of defeated foes. She found herself genuinely impressed by the unwavering resolve Gray displayed during an actual fight. Gray had reached a new level of readiness, even cautioning his mentor to remain vigilant alongside him. He couldn't shake the uneasy feeling creeping over him. Despite their apparent success, the battle had gone almost suspiciously well for their side. The challenge seemed far too simple. If these were the kind of opponents had encountered, she could have easily overcome them all alone, even without any assistance from him. Uneasiness settles over him, as he wonders about whatever lies hidden within the tent. What awaited them promised to be far more frightening than any challenge they had encountered before. As the subject was mentioned, the creature's threatening eyes pierced through the darkness of the tent, fixing a distant, intense stare directly on him. The instant Gray's gaze meets the creature's eyes, a wave of shock runs through him, causing him to tremble. Even though he possesses great strength, he shrinks back in fear and urgently informs his master that they must leave right away. Even remained puzzled by his sudden change in behavior. Without offering any explanation, he shouts at her to escape, his voice trembling with such intense fear that obeys without hesitation. Trusting his urgency, she immediately takes off, racing behind him. While they sprinted forward, it seemed possible they would get away. However, their fearsome enemy suddenly soared down from above, landing in front of them with an incredible leap. Gray feels a surge of terror as the monster appears before him. He firmly rooted himself to the spot, standing his ground as he faced the bold humans. Zarya's face suddenly shifts, revealing her surprise. They noted that the boss monster had approached them directly, seeking a fight. Suddenly, Gray revealed shocking news that caught everyone off guard. This creature was not the real boss monster, just as he is on the verge of disclosing where the true boss is hiding. From behind them, a terrifying voice thundered through the air. A fierce roar echoed through the air, releasing yet another swarm of beasts in pursuit of the group. While the overwhelming sound nearly stunned Zarya, it transformed the ogres into frenzied warriors, eager for the fight. Trembles with fright, unable to make sense of what she is experiencing. A being even more fearsome and menacing than the most formidable ogre had taken control, leading the whole group with an intimidating presence. At last, Gray explained to the group that their true opponent was an ogre general, the main leader controlling the monster nest. The group found themselves trapped, caught between two dangers. In front of them, an elite ogre blocked any hope of escape. Behind them, a massive horde made retreat impossible. Together with the true leader of the nest, feels a wave of disbelief, well aware that a creature of this strength is far beyond their current abilities. She realizes their sole hope for survival lies in defeating the elite ogre blocking their path, path so they can get away. She follows through with her decision without hesitation. He rushed toward the creature, launching an attack. She struck her weapon against his, her resolve to emerge victorious in this fight unwavering. She takes advantage of a brief gap and lands a precise strike on the creature's side. Blood sprayed from the wound, which, under typical circumstances, would have indicated something positive. Her anxiety deepens as she observes. The injury began to mend once more. At the same time, the young hero faced off single-handedly against a horde of monsters, all while revealing what he knew about the ogre general's powers. It seemed that the creature's roar greatly increased both the power and healing abilities of the other monsters. In effect, the group now faced a supercharged ogre far tougher than usual. Taking down a regular ogre would already be a serious challenge under these circumstances, and even Gray struggled to keep up. With a swift motion, she struck one of the monsters with her blade. He asked to watch his back, directing her to hold off the fight a little longer. This causes her to wonder about the incredible plans he might be coming up with. In response, the boy reveals that in circumstances such as these, there is only a single goal that matters to them. The task at hand was to eliminate the most repulsive among them, the wretch concealed behind his stash. The struggle to stay alive was about to start. Gray brought his sword down, striking it forcefully against the creature that stood before him. His expression revealed his irritation at being both surrounded and attacked from the sides. He manages to block the incoming strike and quickly notices yet another furious beast set its sights on him, preparing to attack. He sliced through the opponents, concentrating on carving out a direct route ahead so he could reach his goal. In his haste, he applies excessive force, causing his sword to break apart completely. Now he found himself in a difficult situation, no longer having the single weapon he truly trusted. He swiftly evades the enhanced ogre's powerful downward swing. He quickly shifted his focus to pulling out his backup sword, demonstrating a level of preparedness rarely seen in protagonists. The choice to carry an extra weapon showed he was ready for anything. Still, Gray couldn't shake the concern that his primary blade might not last much longer. His master intervened, throwing her extra sword in his direction and giving him a renewed opportunity to win. He held both spare swords tightly in his hands. He now stood a greater chance in battle, yet it remained clear that this advantage would not allow him to eliminate all the monsters. The obstacles between him and the ogre general were simply too many, and he would have to overcome relentless resistance from its followers along the way. Confident in his own skills, the man suddenly lost all restraint, erupting with a wild burst of speed as he sliced through his foes in a lightning-fast attack. His advance came to a sudden halt as an ogre lunged at him, attempting to land a blow. Fortunately, he manages to avoid the strike and swiftly raises his arms to block the next blow. He grows more exhausted with each moment of the battle. Despite the challenges, he continued to overcome the monsters standing in his path, steadily advancing with each encounter. The ogre general senses a looming danger. The creature makes up its mind to release another earth-shaking roar. The story turned its focus to the realm of Gray's horror. The empowered creatures had just experienced an additional surge in power. The situation worsened for him, as he found himself struggling even harder now that he had to handle their presence. Gray soon understands that the ogre general possesses enough cunning to unravel his plan. Realizing the human's intentions, the ogre general let out a series of thunderous roars, urging its followers to attack with renewed ferocity. One of the attacks was intercepted. Gray forces his way through the crowd of creatures, racing forward without hesitation. Waiting up ahead, an entire swarm of monsters stands prepared to confront him. Rather than confronting each opponent individually, he skillfully slices through only those blocking his path. Despite his efforts, his body still ends up covered with cuts and wounds. The relentless onslaught gradually drained his strength, forcing him to push himself harder as he fought to dodge the ceaseless wave of assaults. As his vigilance waned, one of the ogres lunged forward, knocking him to the ground and holding him firmly in place. The situation had taken a turn for the worse for him, as the ogres had managed to corner him exactly as they had planned. However, their overwhelming anger made them reckless, causing them to forget how to work together. One of the creatures, acting without hesitation, suddenly turns on its companion and cuts it down. Gray realized that their plan likely involved trying to dull his swords, and this thought distracted him for a moment. A towering ogre, exuding an intimidating presence, drew back his massive fist, preparing to deliver a devastating blow aimed at crushing his opponent's skull. The moment was tense. Survival hinged on dodging the attack, as taking the hit would mean certain defeat. He raises his sword, attempting to lessen the impact of the blow. Despite his efforts, the force of the collision slams Bro hard into the ground, leaving him sprawled from the sheer power of the blow. He realized he was standing at the very brink of his existence. Despite his injuries, the man continued to struggle to his feet, embodying true toughness. After the last assault shattered his backup sword, he was left with just a single blade. There were still many ogres left to defeat, along with their powerful leader. Yet again, the odds were stacked against him. Escaping from this predicament seemed almost hopeless. Even though he had gone back in time, he was completely aware of what was happening to him. Gray found himself hopelessly outmatched, overwhelmed by a relentless relentless horde of vicious monsters that steadily drained his strength. He chooses to change the way he fights. He bellowed at his master, urging her to flee while he distracted their pursuer, determined to become the bait so she could get away. Upon hearing his words, responds with a gentle smile, making it clear through her actions that she will not treat him in such a manner. She continued to confront the empowered elite ogre, leaving Gray puzzled about her unwavering resolve to keep battling. He urged her to escape ahead of him, promising he would follow shortly, yet stood her ground and declined to leave without him. In a shocking turn, it became clear that she could no longer run. She endured a deep wound along her thigh. Gray's hopes were completely destroyed, leaving nothing but despair behind. That option was no longer available to them. Every other route had been exhausted. He had no choice but to keep moving ahead, even though it meant heading straight toward his own demise. He slashed his sword with intense anger. He reflected on the cause behind his return to the past. Even though he carried such an important mission, everything he had worked for was now nearing its conclusion. The boy's last sword met a tragic end as it broke apart, its blade chipping and scattering into fragments. Despite being unarmed, he refuses to accept the truth. Gray isn't willing to accept that this is where his story ends. He wished he could harness the abilities that awaited him in the future. The frightening power rivaled that of the Liquidator and had the potential to wound him. Even if he could wield it for just an instant, the creatures would soon be torn apart into fragments. Recalling the intense emotion from that moment, he has shattered blade and slipped into deep meditation. As he opened his eyes again, Gray had changed. He was no longer the frail boy he used to be. With one powerful, fiery strike, he cut through the ogres, destroying them completely. He reduced them to ashes, wielding his fiery black sword. Herself remained confused about the situation. However, it seemed the boy remained restrained, since unleashing his dark abilities did not free him from control. He lets out a breath he didn't know he was holding and offers her a grateful smile, the tension in his face easing. Within moments, Gray swiftly slashes through all the creatures surrounding him, leaving none untouched. Among them was the ogre general. Not even his master could make sense of what had just occurred. She had been forced to concentrate on the powerful ogre standing before her. However, with the ogre general now defeated, it appeared that the effects of the strengthening powers had faded away. Realizes that the creature has lost its ability to heal itself, making it vulnerable enough for her to defeat it without difficulty. She unleashed an imitation of the judgment cut-end technique, slicing through the creature with a less refined but still effective move. The statement was made that the elite ogre held no power of its own without the guidance of its master. After a long struggle, victory was finally theirs. Despite overwhelming challenges, the two of them held their ground and emerged triumphant from the battle. Even after somehow fighting her way through a whole crowd of ogres, Gray felt sorry and expressed regret for the fact that her sword had been broken, explained that her gesture was minor when compared to him having saved her life. She picks up the sword, determined to challenge him about the move he used in the final moments. However, she is interrupted before she has the chance to complete her thought. The boy collapses onto the ground, rendered completely unconscious by the lingering effects. His master called out his name with worry as he walked away. The scene shifts to reveal Gray's thoughts as he tries to make sense of everything around him. He notices only a single door suspended in the air before him, bound tightly with chains. He remains uncertain, not understanding what is happening until the door finally unlocks and opens. It was the identical type of dark energy. He made use of it by relying on his special power. He is struck by an unexpected understanding. He realizes that this ability belongs solely to him. Curiosity fills his mind as he considers the possible outcomes if he succeeds in forcing the door open. He realized that he had the chance to claim the power for himself. Fueled by determination, he moves forward with resolve. Yet as soon as his foot touches the ground, a chilling presence washed over him, sending terror deep into his very core. After taking just a single step, he already felt the weight of his presence. Gray, overwhelmed by fear, hurriedly made his way back. Uncertainty clouded his mind, as he still lacked a clear understanding of where his power truly originated. One fact had just become undeniable to him. Attempting to use his abilities while in this condition would be a grave mistake. There was no question in his mind that death awaited him, a certainty so terrifying that it overwhelmed him with emotion, leaving him in tears. A mysterious voice emerged from the darkness, slipping into his thoughts and praising the choice he had just made. Before Gray has a chance to make sense of what happened, he jolts awake in his bed, his heart racing with fear. His master stood close, relief showing on his face as he watched him regain consciousness. With concern in his voice, the master inquired about his surroundings. She hurriedly transported him to the village infirmary, doing everything she could to get him help as quickly as possible. To her surprise, he had remained unconscious for an entire 5 days. The narrator expressed relief that the author chose not to use the typical 3 days trope found in many other stories. Meanwhile, concern for his safety weighed heavily on her mind, as Gray struggled to come to terms with the reality that he required almost a week to recover from the strain caused by the technique he had employed. Herself believed that he had surpassed everyone's expectations during the fight, showing what it truly meant to overcome impossible challenges. Despite her efforts to remain calm, she couldn't hide her worry about his physical physical condition, so she inquired whether he was able to move without difficulty. Eager to see if it would work, the boy attempts to raise his arm. Despite his efforts, he found himself powerless, barely able to use his abilities after exhausting so much energy. Given his current condition, wielding a sword was out of the question due to his injury. In fact, even the most basic movements seemed impossible, making it urgent for him to find a solution quickly. On top of that, a dark bruise remained on his arm, a clear reminder of the recent fight. Began to worry about Gray's state, fully aware that he struggled to control his movements. Gray acknowledged his own vulnerability, admitting he was powerless at that moment. His master acknowledged that his arm would not heal quickly, explaining that all the bones in it had been completely broken. The boy found himself startled by the discovery, noticing with some confusion that he felt no pain at all. The improvement was a result of the magical potion treatment he had. The boy stares in shock, unable to believe what just happened. He knows these items cost a fortune, yet she has just used one on him without hesitation. Reassures everyone that there is no need for concern, since the village chief himself presented them with a reward. The boy stands in disbelief, struggling to process the news. Although he has never met the village chief, he has somehow been given a magical potion paid for by him. Considered how oblivious he seemed, unable to grasp what was happening around him. She emphasized in clear, strong terms that Gray had now become the village's official savior and hero. Before he has a chance to process her words, the village chief bursts into the room and warmly acknowledges the boy's efforts, expressing deep gratitude for all that he has done. His impressive feat became the focus of attention. The village chief pointed out to the child that an ogre general possessed such immense strength that a whole village would need to unite just to face a single one. This terrifying beast once endangered their home, but against all odds, a lone boy battled fiercely, defeated the monster, and secured the villagers' safety. The village chief felt a deep sense of gratitude, recognizing that the courageous actions of the boy and his mentor had made everything possible. Their safety was now assured, and the danger that once loomed over their lives had finally passed. Not wanting to take full recognition for the achievement, Gray insisted that others were overstating his actions. The village chief, however, believes that he is the one being accused of diminishing the chief's accomplishments. After taking a moment to consider, Gray pondered the result. He begins to wonder if the village chief's advice might hold some truth. Memories from his past life come flooding back. He recalls how this very village was once destroyed, reduced to nothing but ruins by a savage ogre attack. Realizing this, he understands just how important his recent achievement truly is. The village leader takes great pride in explaining his own achievements at length. Yet at this moment, his attention remains fixed on the boy's goal of succeeding in the World Union Academy's entrance exam. On that note, Gray suddenly recalled the real purpose behind his actions. He had recklessly ventured into the monster nest to hunt its creatures, despite his exam looming just weeks away. Because so much time had slipped by during his distractions, now only 2 days remained before the exam would begin. Reaching the destination required a 3-day journey on foot. Although traveling by horse would allow him to cover the distance faster, he lacked the funds to rent or buy one. He urgently asked the village chief for a horse, hoping to borrow one for his upcoming journey. Fortunately, the leader had anticipated that the boy would ask for this favor, so he had already set aside the finest horse to aid him on his journey. Smile hinted at the fact that they had always intended to help him, even if he hadn't regained consciousness that day. Gray's friends stood by him through every challenge, showing what true support looked like. They wished to meet more people like that throughout their lives as well. Gray stepped out of the infirmary and was immediately met by the thunderous cheers of the villagers, all shouting the boy's name and offering their enthusiastic support for his upcoming exam. Everyone hoped that he would give his all. They openly expressed their gratitude to him for his actions, showing no hesitation. The villagers go so far as to offer him a sack filled with money as a gesture of their support. Little by little, each person contributed what they could. He needed to find a way to earn enough money to register for the entrance exam and provide for himself while attending the academy. The boy feels a deep and lasting gratitude toward the villagers. Those around him express their affection through unwavering support. He adds with a hint of humor that returning after a failed attempt would be incredibly embarrassing. Displayed unwavering faith in her student, pointing out that none of the entrance exam applicants possess the ability to defeat an ogre general by themselves. There are additional worries weighing on his mind. The boy feels anxious about his injured arm, uncertain about when it might recover since it remains in bad shape. In response, his master suggests he should practice using his left arm while waiting for the other to heal. Although his left arm worked perfectly well, he simply felt more comfortable using his right. Despite his concerns, his teacher believes that his abilities are strong enough for it to make no difference. Gray expressed his worries, admitting that the difficulty difficulty of the entrance exam might be too much for him, especially since having only one functioning arm could hold him back. Despite her optimism, realizes that the instructors and examiners at the academy are highly observant. She knows that once they notice the boy's abilities, he will be chosen. With these thoughts in mind, the boy climbs onto his horse. His teacher stood with certainty, assuring everyone that he would succeed, as if there were no other possibility. He expressed his gratitude for all she had done, and assured her that he would not let her down. He remembered witnessing the village reduced to ashes in his former life. He felt grateful that these individuals were able to start over with him. From this point forward, he could sense the world beginning to transform. With his newfound abilities, he was determined to shape what lay ahead. In the following scene, the young man at last arrives where he has been heading. He gazes forward, meeting their stares with unwavering eyes. The impressive magnificence of the World Union Academy. Within the arena, the examiner informed everyone that the exam tickets would soon be handed out, instructing all the candidates to stay inside the arena. Judging by the scene, a crowd of hopefuls had gathered, yet just 20 fortunate individuals would secure a place in the class. The group argued over how the number of available seats shifted from year to year, noting that sometimes the academy welcomed as many as 50 students, while in other unusual years, only a single person was admitted. It seemed clear that the selection criteria were not set in stone. At that moment, Professor Ariel steps forward, drawing everyone's attention to herself. She turns to the group of examinees and informs them that their task will be to gather the paper currently being shown. With a quick flick of her fingers, a swirling yellow portal appeared, unleashing a surge of mystical power into the surroundings. Tickets suddenly appeared in the hands of every examinee, without any effort on their part. The boy picked up his ticket, noticing that he had been assigned the examinee number 513 for the fencing course. Professor Ariel explained that their ticket contained only the essential information, reassuring everyone that there was no cause for concern since the procedure remained unchanged every year. She went on to explain that the academy paid no attention to a person's age, gender, background, or social standing. To put it simply, they genuinely couldn't care less about whether someone identifies as an attack helicopter or anything else. They showed so little interest that they never bothered to learn anyone's name. Those who are meant to succeed in the selection process will be requested to provide additional details. However, for the majority of test takers present, this step holds no real significance. Professor Ariel reassures everyone that using a false name is acceptable, once again highlighting the academy's indifference. Once more, misfortune found the boy, as he had arrived without his sword, only to be assigned to the fencing course. This unexpected turn led him to doubt whether the system was truly fair. Professor Ariel amused the class by revealing that she had chosen a course for each student solely by judging their appearance. The situation struck them as ironic. Although she had a reputation for being insightful, it amused them that just moments after discussing discrimination, she would make such a contradictory statement. Ariel didn't mind making adjustments to the course information if she realized she had made any mistakes. The examinees themselves believed it was nearly impossible to determine the correct course just by looking at the site, particularly since there were so many options available. It seemed clear to them that the academy had likely looked into their backgrounds in advance, which explained how the academy possessed that information. The topic of mind-reading magic is mentioned, but Professor Ariel ignores the students' worries. Instead, she observes that no one seems upset about the course they've been assigned. With that in mind, she moves on to announce the exam schedule to the class. The ticket instantly displayed the information in clear detail. Gray felt a wave of anxiety as he realized his exam was set for the very first day, leaving him no opportunity for his arm to recover. Ariel explains that this test is a one-time event that will determine everyone's fate. She warns that anyone who arrives late will be instantly disqualified, with no second chances. She also emphasizes that their schedules are fixed and cannot be changed or argued about, no matter what they ask. Gray faced troubling news as he grappled with his slow recovery. Silently, he pleaded for his body to somehow surprise him and be restored by the next day. The following morning dawns, bringing with it an unexpected turn of events. The boy's arm remained unchanged, showing no signs of recovery. Despite this, he was left with no option except to attempt the exam while still injured. Gray heard his examination number announced. He moved forward with clear frustration, making an effort to steady his nerves and hold on to a sense of hopefulness about what was happening. After examining his left arm, he found nothing wrong with it. With enough effort, he was also able to move his right arm. He carefully watched the examiner's actions, hoping to spot a tactic that would lead him to victory. He observed as a candidate faced off against an examiner in a match. The applicant charges forward without hesitation, launching an attack without considering the consequences. By the time he finished his assault, the examiner remains calm and stands with a relaxed posture. He stood in anticipation, eager to see what his opponent would do next. The candidate gripped his sword tightly and swept it forward, preparing to strike once more. Even that attack proves useless, as it is effortlessly deflected. It was more than that. The examiner skillfully turns aside alongside the incoming sword with a swift motion. With one last powerful strike, the force hurled him through the air. His body collapsed onto the ground. The examiner announced the outcome of the test and directed him to leave the room. Some of them wondered if Gray had discovered anything. The funniest aspect lay in the way the man simply surrendered, fully aware that he was moments away from facing a harsh defeat. His turn is announced, signaling that he should enter the arena. Gray thought about his odds and understood he stood no chance against an examiner who had easily defeated a candidate much larger than himself. Within the arena, the young competitor receives the opportunity to act first. Despite knowing the fight would be unfair, he realized he still needed to leave a mark. The battle started as Gray lunged forward, aiming to land the first blow. He recalls his master's guidance, urging him to engage every part of his body when swinging, not just his arms, and he puts her teaching into action. He believes that relying on his remaining strength is the only way he can handle losing his right arm. He launched the opening attack, but the examiner it with ease. Gray continued to have difficulty relying on his typical fighting techniques. Despite his efforts to compensate for his missing right arm, the reality remained that he was facing a significant disadvantage in this situation. The examiner responds aggressively, swinging his weapon in an attempt to strike his opponent down. To Gray's surprise, the sword drifts toward him at a much slower pace than he expected. He seemed able to predict where it would go, moving calmly rather than hastily. The boy managed to defend himself, stopping the attack just in time. The lingering pressure from the examiner's powerful strike remained heavy on them. Simultaneously, he notices that the examiner's skills lack the polish that possesses. Believing in the methods she taught him, he thinks that by concentrating on those techniques, he might spot a weakness and create a chance to break through. Keeping that plan in focus, Gray charged forward with all his strength, determined to overpower the instructor. The instructor found himself losing ground, ironically overwhelmed by the very speed that made him formidable. Gray started to feel a surge of confidence as he realized that defeating the examiner would be an easy task for him. His master's words echoed once more in his thoughts. Once again, the two opponents' swords met in a fierce collision. Gray completely overpowers his adversary by expertly deflecting every attack. Now filled with newfound confidence, he prepared to bring the fight to an end. Gray pressed on with his unyielding attack, making it difficult for the instructor, who struggled desperately to regain command of the situation. Even though the boy understood his opponent's method, countering it while intentionally holding back remained a difficult challenge for him. He took advantage of his superior speed, attempting a swift, direct thrust, but his attack unexpectedly veered off course. The gap in sheer strength was overwhelming. Even with both hands, disrupting the instructor's stance would have been difficult, but attempting it with just one hand made it nearly impossible. Gray's hostility gradually caused the nerd's actions to become more forceful. Although it involved some danger, the nerd realized this could be his chance to take a bold step. Gray, confident in his strategy, allowed the instructor to maneuver him right to the brink of the stage, leaving a wide opening in his own defense. Just as anticipated, Glasses lunged forward, seizing the opportunity to deliver what he hoped would be the final strike. The instructor, fooled by a classic deception, launched a broad and obvious attack just as Gray had expected. The youthful fighter shifted his footing, preparing himself as the attack approached. He understood that nothing revealed a weakness faster than an impatient and overzealous advance. A wide, expected attack gave him the perfect opening to capitalize on his quickness. In a flash, he closed the distance and arrived at the instructor's unguarded side. Regardless of how much stronger one person might be than another, it is impossible to guard against a ruthless attack that comes unexpectedly from behind. Just moments before he could drive his sword forward to claim victory, the referee moved between the fighters, raising a hand to indicate that the match was over. Gray hesitated, letting his weapon fall to his side. Although the fight had concluded, it seemed to have ended almost too quickly. As the exam's time limit expired, the referee declared that the fight had ended in a tie. Frustration tightened the young man's jaw as he clenched his teeth. Despite all his effort, he had not succeeded. His hard work had not been enough to accomplish the task. He gripped his reliable sword firmly for a few seconds, then slowly loosened his hold. Gray stepped down from the stage, displaying composure as he acknowledged the outcome. He put forth his utmost effort, but realizing that he couldn't defeat an instructor, even while the instructor was injured, made him understand that his ambitious dreams were more distant than he had imagined. From a hopeful perspective, his arm was expected to recover fully by the following year, which meant he could give the entrance exam another shot at his best. Regardless of how things turned out, he recognized that this had been a meaningful experience, one he felt thankful for. A full week had gone by since Gray had come close to victory, but ultimately lost to the boy with glasses. guesses. On that day, the faculty members of World Union Academy assembled in meeting room 53 to review and deliberate over the outcomes of the entrance examinations. The elderly man with white hair began the gathering, encouraging his fellow members to openly share their opinions about the current year's group. Almost at once, the room echoed with sounds of discontent. That year, a plan had been set in place requiring all the professors to supervise the exams as a group. The process dragged on, making it slow and monotonous. Still, a few found the new system to their liking. The faculty realized that dismissing a gifted individual solely to make things easier for themselves was not an option they could justify. The old man shifted the conversation's focus from the exam system, redirecting everyone's attention to the eager students once again. He began the swordsmanship assessment by conjuring magical projections of each candidate, allowing him to review the performances of those who had advanced one final time. It was clear that anyone who managed to defeat the examiner without hesitation succeeded immediately. For the others, their performance would be judged on the skills they displayed and their endurance throughout the 15 minutes of intense combat. Apart from the few who completely overpowered the instructor, after careful consideration, the group selected 3 exceptional candidates, identified as numbers 5, 217, and 753. The group reached a consensus to limit the selection to only those 3 individuals. They believed that including any more students with less ability would make it difficult for those children to handle the coursework. There were no objections to the boundary that had been set, so the list of accepted students for the swordsmanship class was finalized. At least, that was how it was meant to be. A light-hearted remark suddenly mentioned candidate number 513, Gray Lee. The source was revealed to be the mysterious Professor Ariel, known for her striking red hair. Because she referred to a number they didn't recognize, the other professors decided to review the video recordings. They realized that if the match had lasted just a moment longer, the young man probably would have come out on top. However, his victory depended on using tricks and traps to defeat a test proctor. This made them wonder if the Academy's challenges might be more than he could handle. Observers skilled in swordsmanship quickly recognized the sound technique on display, yet they also noticed an absence of strength and an obvious imbalance throughout the entire match. In the end, the instructors responsible for the swordsmanship program decided against admitting candidate 513 into the Academy. As they focused on ridiculing the children's imperfections, Professor Ariel cast a disdainful glance at her colleagues, silently judging them as clueless and incompetent. Although everyone present had viewed the same video, none of them managed to spot the detail she had noticed. Observing their obliviousness, she began to question whether the entire format of the exam was pointless. The morning following the last round of discussions, the candidates received a summons to return to the center of town. The group received instructions to meet at 11 o'clock in the morning. Anxiety filled the air as each person silently wished to be chosen. At last, the awaited moment arrived. A representative from the Academy raised their voice to declare that 6 individuals had successfully completed the swordsmanship course. Each person clutched their slip of paper tightly, silently hoping to be chosen as one of the 6. Candidates numbered 5 and 217 were announced before anyone else. As soon as their numbers were read, the slips of paper bearing their names quickly disintegrated into ash. The following candidates stepped forward in turn. Numbers 432, 615, 753, and 925. With that, the list was complete. Among the hundreds who applied, just 6 possessed the talent required to earn a place at the world's top training academy. Gray arrived that day, holding onto a fragile hope, but soon found himself overwhelmed by the harsh realization that he might fall short of the mark. The chosen applicants received directions to walk across the bridge and finish signing up before the day was over. Those who succeeded could hardly contain their joy, eager to begin their journey among society's elite. The ones who failed cast their eyes to the ground, their expressions heavy with disappointment as they dwelled on their defeat. After the swordsmanship course concluded, the representative made an unexpected announcement, revealing that a single examinee had been chosen for the Divine Eye special admission. Everyone recognized her instantly. It was candidate 513N, known to all as Gray Mother Lee. His slip of paper ignited with a uniquely colored flame, unlike any that had been seen before. The vivid blue fire immediately drew the eyes of everyone present. Gray had expected to spend another year working on his recovery and training, but unexpectedly, he received permission to move forward. The other candidates standing nearby burst into laughter, their voices filled with mockery as soon as they heard the words, Divine Eye Special Admission. Gray was completely unaware of the situation he had just stumbled into. It was the first occasion he had ever encountered anything related to the mysterious Divine Eye. Most people viewed this as a sham admission, believing it was merely a tactic to let an undeserving candidate slip in through a hidden loophole, a clear indication, in their eyes, that World Union Academy was losing its former prestige. Surrounded by the harsh and bitter conversations, Gray felt uneasy at the thought of being labeled a student. He questioned how he had even been chosen, considering he lacked any influential contacts. He was certain his master didn't possess enough influence to sway the Academy's decisions. As the rejected candidates jeered at the lone individual who had succeeded thanks to the divine eye, a bald, elderly hermit chastised them sharply for showing contempt toward a tradition that had been honored for generations. From the bald hermit's perspective, this form of admission stands as a respected tradition that has given rise to numerous heroes throughout the past 100 years. Just as everyone anticipated, the outcasts ridiculed the hermit, calling him outdated. The divine eye had once been known as a cradle for heroes, but those days were long gone. Among the latest individuals considered for the divine eye were Amy White, Bella, Leek Muller, and Jacob Bloomfield. All four of them shared a single trait. Everyone around them considered them hopelessly unsuccessful. They had already come across those names before. Before long, Amy White would rise to the rank of Sword Saint. Bella was destined to rise as the renowned sage. Jacob Bloomfield was destined to inherit the role of the sacred archer. The trio would become the leading experts in their field, standing as the primary opponents to the liquidator's name would now be remembered together with those of the great legends. The successful candidates received a warm welcome and were given new uniforms to put on. As the entrance ceremony approached, the newcomers gathered in the plaza located before the main office building. Gray slipped into his fresh outfit, finding that it suited him perfectly. The black blazer, detailed with the Academy's gold crest, looked impeccably sharp. His earlier sense of discouragement faded, replaced by newfound confidence as he stood among his classmates. Upon arriving at the plaza, several of the newer recruits appeared puzzled, unable to find anything inside the space. The misunderstanding was resolved as a staff member from the Academy hurried over to them, looking sincerely apologetic. He mentioned that preparations for the ceremony were running behind schedule because of some confusion. Fortunately, resolving the issue would be quick. The new team members needed to move back a bit more to make room for the setup. The rookies did as the staff directed, but their eyes were filled with doubt as they observed the proceedings. Mr. Staff dropped to one knee and himself by adjusting something on the ground. Once he had finished his brief preparations, he placed his hand on the ground, and in an instant, a huge magic circle sprang to life beneath him. Without warning, a massive array of seats shaped like a coliseum sprang up from within the magical circle. The newcomers stood in awe, unable to believe the immense display of magic unfolding before them, as nothing in their past experiences had prepared them for such a spectacle. Within moments, the plaza transformed into a full-fledged arena, featuring both seating and a stage. Mr. Staff expressed regret for making everyone wait again, then told the new recruits they could choose any seat they preferred. Although still unsettled by the unbelievable magic they had just witnessed, they decided to go along with the others. A few of the more experienced newcomers understood that teleportation magic had been used to instantly create the arena. Gray slipped into a chair positioned in the center row, his movements subdued. He figured the Academy had chosen this spot to host an elaborate entrance ceremony right beside the school's main building. The group was openly showing off the influence held by the World Union Academy. After the group settled into their places, several newcomers observed that the room seemed prepared for a much larger crowd. With just 30 people present, the presence of hundreds of empty chairs appeared unnecessary. The World Union Academy lived up to its reputation by bringing together the most talented individuals from across the globe. Looking toward the sky revealed the true significance of those words. A multitude of airships and dragon-drawn carriages soared through the sky above, casting shadows that obscured the sunlight. Gray gazed upward and identified the largest magic airship in the sky as the memories of his past surfaced, recalling the time he had climbed aboard this massive vessel while serving as expendable support for the Liquidator subjugation squad. The event truly matched the impressive stories people had heard about it. Displaying something so grand for a mere entrance ceremony was yet another method used to show off to newcomers. The World Union Academy made a point of displaying its influence for everyone to see. After all the ships touched down without incident, the students, each of whom had succeeded in passing a rigorous entrance exam back in their respective regions, emerged from their vessels. The rest of the group settled into the last empty spots, causing the stands to become crowded. Once everyone was in place, the event was ready to begin. The employee responsible for creating the arena gave a signal, marking the beginning of a new chapter in everyone's lives. Once the dazzling demonstrations of power concluded, the headmaster delivered a short address to commence the entrance exam. Gray sat restlessly, a hint of boredom settling over him. Despite the honor of joining the world's most renowned academy, The ceremony unfolding before him seemed no different from any dull school assembly he'd attended before. The headmaster then invited the highest-ranking students from each course to step forward to the podium. The boy who had been seated next to Gray rose from his seat. This blonde student named held the position of top performer in the swordsmanship course. As he walked down the stairs with assurance, rumors quickly circulated among the crowd about how he had managed to defeat the examiner in the blink of an eye. Rumors spread that this newcomer's skill with a sword already rivals that of the experienced professors, appeared to be a secret agent assigned to create a pretend family, partnering with a skilled assassin, and a young girl gifted with the ability to read minds. Gray didn't feel particularly impressed. Instead, a slight curiosity stirred within him. Before delivering his speech, made sure he had permission to express his true feelings openly. After receiving permission to proceed, he fixed his intense stare on the other new recruits. He began his address by formally expressing his grievances to the academy. To begin, he offered his congratulations to those classmates who had gained admission through the standard process. He considers it a tremendous privilege to stand alongside the most talented individuals of his generation. Wished for everyone to finish their studies as individuals ready to make a real difference in the world. To achieve their goal, cooperation between them became essential. He eagerly anticipates the moment when he and his classmates will rise as accomplished students of the renowned World Union Academy. Once the previous matters were settled, he drew everyone's attention to the fact that an individual present did not belong in the plaza and was unworthy of being there. He aimed this accusation at Professor Ariel, the person responsible for managing the special admissions program known as the Divine Eye. On the first day of classes, she found herself taken aback when a freshman singled her out. Professor Ariel confidently declared that all the students present had successfully completed the challenging exam. Although none of them matched exceptional abilities, they had proven that they deserved their place. Driven by curiosity and intrigue, she questioned the overconfident newcomer about his incessant, boastful chatter. Spoke directly, openly addressing the mysterious applicant who had gained entry using an outdated and questionable loophole. He, like many others, believed the Divine Eye special admission was simply a loophole that allowed less qualified students to enter the academy. Shouted for the student who had received special admission to reveal themselves, give back the prestigious uniform, and depart in disgrace. The other new recruits appeared inspired by his confident statements and firm decisions. At the same time, the person who was drawing attention struggled to blend in with everyone else. Fortunately, the aggressive top student remained unaware of what Gray looked like. As long as Gray kept quiet, he believed he would be able to avoid any problems. Professor Ariel intervened to ease the atmosphere, complimenting the current group on their energetic spirit. Remained resolute, expressing his strong beliefs in favor of continuing student admissions using the traditional curriculum, despite opposition. Professor Ariel's patience wore thin with Blondie, and she questioned him in a foreboding tone, challenging whether he truly believed he could defeat the student she had chosen for a class. Instinctively retreated a few paces as the mysterious professor's overwhelming presence bore down on him. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words would come out. He clenched his jaw and took a moment to steady his nerves, replied with self-assurance, claiming he was more than capable of thoroughly defeating the unworthy student. Ariel had anticipated that kind of response. Since she was drawn to confident boys, she decided to suggest a bet. She was prepared to risk her own career, even if it meant jeopardizing the student's place at the academy. Gray felt uneasy at the mention of that wager, wondered whether the bet involved a direct fight with a special admission student, but Professor Ariel dismissed the idea, finding such a crude and uninteresting contest beneath her. She firmly believed that if her son unleashed his full strength, would be in serious danger, possibly even losing his life. As a teacher, she knew she could never allow a talented student's future to be threatened like that. Her comment sliced effortlessly through his ego, leaving him stung. Whatever her intentions were, she had successfully provoked him into accepting her challenge. Professor Ariel suggested shifting the wager to focus on monster subjugation, believing this approach would offer greater safety for everyone concerned. She also understands that strength lies in battling monsters rather than facing other people. The facts are straightforward. Both contestants are required to defeat the monsters that she selects for them as their targets. With every new round, the monster that everyone aimed for became more powerful. The first person to surrender or fail to control the target would be declared the loser. Should her student be defeated, she was prepared to step down from her esteemed role as a professor without hesitation and would dismiss all special admission students she supervised. If ended up losing, he would be forced to follow any instructions she gave him. Many people would eagerly agree to become the red-haired professor's servant without hesitation. However, before making that that choice, wondered aloud about which monster would be their initial target. He felt sure of his ability to defeat any adversary, but he preferred to avoid getting involved in any strange situations. After thinking it over for a moment, she decided on the ideal person to go after first. The woman demanded that the severed head of an ogre general be placed on her desk. Should find the task too simple, she was more than willing to raise the challenge for him. However, judging from how the crowd responded, it was clear that such measures weren't necessary. Most people were already criticizing her requests, saying they were excessive. Gray puzzled over her decision, wondering what made her choose an ogre general, especially one he himself had already defeated. In contrast, slammed his fist down onto the podium. He passionately insisted that facing an ogre general alone was impossible for any individual to conquer. Observing Blondie's objections, she decided to make things easier and adjusted the deadline to span the entire year. Young remained stubborn, unwilling to participate in the challenge. He insisted that if a person could defeat a disaster-level monster after only a year of training, then the world wouldn't be plagued by hardship. Since the bet seemed ridiculous to him, insisted on setting a goal that made more sense. At that moment, he realized that the clever woman had intentionally selected an unbeatable monster, ensuring the bet would conclude without anyone claiming victory. Because he continued to complain, Professor Ariel eventually gave in and introduced an additional condition to their wager. Should the contest end in a tie, the victory would go to Young. This meant that if her son could not overcome the ogre general in the span of 1 year, she would willingly relinquish her position and remove each of her exceptional pupils from the school. Given all the conditions set up to benefit, it would make him appear cowardly if he continued to turn down the challenge. The imitation version of Forger needed to understand that he was merely a pawn in this situation, with the result already predetermined. Despite this, he found himself caught up in the professor's clever schemes. He found himself with no choice but to agree to a bet that appeared impossible to win. Just to be clear, he did question whether it would count if General Ogre was already hurt or weakened. No one needed to mention that the creature must appear in its usual combat shape. To finalize the agreement, the professor's eye behind her monocle began to shine, signaling that her magic was crafting a binding contract. All the terms were carefully outlined and magically engraved within the contract's form. Little only needed to put his signature on the paper when he felt prepared. In front of all the teachers and his fellow freshmen, he confidently wrote his signature on the mysterious contract. Once the agreement was settled, he cautiously inquired whether the student who had entered by unconventional means truly had a chance of succeeding. Professor Ariel, however, chose not to provide him with a direct response. The rest of the professors remained seated, appearing unfazed by the antics of the elderly, red-haired raccoon, as if such behavior was nothing new to them. Everyone viewed her as a once great mage, whose best days were behind her, now passing the time with aimless antics simply for her own amusement. Sitting at his desk, Gray let out a weary sigh, realizing that the wager deciding his fate had been finalized without any say from him. He realized that she had carefully phrased the conditions so that the ogre general he had defeated would be counted within the set period. From the very start, it was clear that this wager was already decided. Professor Ariel had deceived along with the rest of the group, but only Gray recognized what was happening. Having an ally who isn't afraid to use underhanded tactics proved to be a tremendous advantage. Once the chaos of the bet had subsided, and the entrance ceremony drew to a close, the new students were guided into their inaugural class, which was titled The Basics of Magic. The professor leading the class recognized that beginning a lecture on the first day was unexpected for many. He hoped his students would quickly adapt to this fast-moving environment. At this academy, every day was valuable, and there was no time to lose. They were set to begin with the fundamentals, focusing first on the straightforward use of magic. Hidden deep inside every human body was a mysterious force known as ether, unseen by the naked eye. By controlling the magical pathways within themselves, people could unlock immense and unimaginable power. Gray had worried at first about falling behind in his classes, yet this opening lecture seemed within his grasp. The material being covered was familiar to him, since he had listened to these same explanations during his time at the subjugation boot camp. Despite everything, his class placement turned out to be unfortunate. Among the various beginner courses in magic, he found himself placed in the same class as. Should anyone discover that he is the notorious Divine Eyes student who received special admission, he could say farewell to any hope of a peaceful life. As he drifted into his own thoughts, the professor caught sight of him and called attention to his apparent lack of interest in the lesson. The professor took it as an insult when a newcomer in his class started to lose interest and looked elsewhere before the first 5 minutes of his introduction had even passed. Gray quickly expressed regret for letting his eyes stray. However, he couldn't shake the odd feeling that the professor had managed to notice him, despite the fact that he was seated at the farthest row in the lecture hall. The professor intensified the tension in the room by insisting that the inattentive student perform a demonstration demonstration. The fact that he appeared uninterested during the beginner class suggested he already knew how to perform simple magic. Gray proved to be a difficult target for bullies. With a calm confidence, he made it clear that his main strength lay in swordsmanship. He believed that even without the ability to use magic, he would manage just fine. The professor insisted that, regardless of wielding a sword in true combat, every fighter must master the fundamentals to work effectively alongside a mage. According to the professor, understanding the principles of magic and experiencing its use firsthand is the bare minimum expected from any swordsman. Just then, Gray recalled that he had already heard those words during previous boot camp sessions. This made him think that today's lesson would probably end with the same familiar chant. He wanted to be sure, so he inquired whether the purpose of today's lesson was to master the straightforward but powerful ether bullet technique. Because the professor was familiar with the name, he believed he would be able to make use of it. Gray silently expressed his gratitude for the grueling boot camp he had endured. Recognizing a perfect chance to showcase a real demonstration, the professor chose to set up a one-on-one duel. He summoned the Academy's best swordsman of the year to step onto the stage. Blondie rose from his seat with enthusiasm and respectfully acknowledged the professor. He went on to mention that he had received training in both swordsmanship and magic long before attending school, suggesting that it could be dangerous for an ordinary person to challenge him. The professor explained that regardless of how much the skill levels differed, ether bullets could not cause death, which meant everyone could use their full strength without worry. Additionally, he announced that Gray had earned the title of Divine Eye Student for the year, fully aware of how deeply resented the anonymous student who had entered through unofficial means. All eyes in the lecture hall shifted toward Gray as each student made a mental note of his appearance. From the very beginning, everything had been arranged against him. Before the day was even over, a professor had already exposed his personal information. The elderly man had purposefully exposed who he was, driven by sinister motives. Upon learning there was an opportunity to fire an actual bullet at the person he despised, eagerly agreed to teach the basics to a newcomer with a questionable background. This moment served as a chance to reveal to an inexperienced newcomer the true nature of World Union Academy. Rage coursed through him, his veins bulging as he furiously ordered Gray to back off immediately. The boy's first day had turned out nothing like anyone had hoped. On the stage, the two faced one another as the troublesome professor outlined the rules. He informed them that, upon his signal, each participant would fire ether bullets at their rival. Gray had just a handful of days to pick up basic magic skills during his time at boot camp. Although the professor assured everyone that the bullets weren't deadly, Gray knew they could still cause pain. The moment the signal was given, quickly collected a large amount of ether in his hands, intent on demonstrating just how much stronger a true student was compared to an imposter. Driven into a tight spot and compelled to defend himself, Gray concentrated and shaped his ether. Relying on everything he had learned before, he made one last, urgent effort. As soon as everyone in the lecture hall noticed the enormous black hole looming before them, ready to consume a tiny bullet, a hush swept over the entire room, and Gray stared in utter disbelief, completely caught off guard by the unexpected turn of events. Just as anticipated, the swirling black hole devoured the small ether bullet without leaving a trace. His eyes widened with unmistakable fear, while the deadly spell crept nearer, threatening his safety. Overcome with anxiety, the professor lifted his hand, channeling all his magical strength in a desperate attempt to stop disaster from unfolding. A shimmering golden shield halted the unstoppable surge of the strange ether projectile. The defense absorbed nearly all of the attack's power, yet the danger remained dangerously close. In that critical moment, he faltered by easing his guard. The golden barrier began to fracture, its surface splintering ominously as the force against it grew. At last, the ether bullet black hole could no longer contain its energy and burst apart, sending the magic barrier scattering into countless shimmering fragments of light. The explosion erupted, plunging the lecture hall into utter turmoil. The new recruits instinctively squeezed their eyes shut and tensed up, preparing for the worst. Little, the intended target, ended up sprawled on the ground, howling at the top of his lungs in terror. Upon recognizing his mistake, the professor rushed over to the swordsmanship course's standout student, determined to check if the young talent was unharmed. Slowly rose to his feet, brushed the dust from his clothes, and let the professor know with a confident nod that he was unharmed. Once the professor had confirmed that Blondie was unharmed, he shifted his focus to the individual responsible for nearly causing an explosion in the entire area. If the barrier had not absorbed the force, the strange ether bullet might have been fatal for and could have harmed several others. Not even the most experienced magic professors at the Academy were capable of producing an ether bullet with such immense power. He was eager to discover how the young man had managed to create such a powerful and devastating effect. Gray found himself bewildered, realizing that the force he had just released far surpassed the weak attempt his challenger had made. He wondered if the spell he had picked up while serving on the subjugation squad was different from the version taught at the Academy. He wondered aloud to the professor whether he had made any mistakes. The old man felt confident that the projectile he fired had indeed been an ether bullet. The main distinction lay in how powerful the spell was. Additionally, the way Gray had amplified the spell was far from ordinary. The immense size and strength could only result from utilizing highly compressed ether. Not a single rookie was familiar with the word, much less aware of its meaning. Even seasoned professors struggled to create or analyze super compressed ether, finding it a formidable challenge. Despite this, the student known for stirring up controversy effortlessly employed it to reshape a simple spell. There was not a single person within the academy capable of matching that feat. The students began to regard the newcomer with a mix of respect and apprehension after learning he had been accepted through the divine eye. Many of them expressed their belief that Gray deserved a place in the magic course rather than where he had been assigned. He could recall only what his memory allowed. Every spell mastered by the subjugation squad matched the one he had just cast. Within the team, Gray stood out as someone who lacked the talent needed for such magic. He remained unconvinced that any special kind of enhanced ether was involved. Determined to prove his point, he conjured another ether bullet and maintained that anyone could achieve such a feat with sufficient practice. The professor, instead of offering any explanation, burst into wild, uncontrollable laughter, leaving him more bewildered than before. Gray found himself frozen in place, unable to decide on a course of action, his expression blank with confusion. At the beginning of the class, the professor's attitude was openly unfriendly, but as the lesson continued, his manner changed completely. He was currently making an effort to persuade the student with the special admission status to join the magic program. Gray politely turned down the lively offer, remembering how he had always been told he lacked any magical ability, making it hard for him to imagine starting now. The professor considered the rejection to be utterly absurd. In his view, if someone like Gray, who could generate highly condensed ether simply by compressing it, was considered untalented, then no one else should bother practicing magic at all. The professor even declared that Gray was a once-in-a-generation genius, surpassing the expectations of the academy itself. Many would have questioned the judgment of anyone claiming the child lacked magical skill, suspecting they must be under the influence of something illicit. The new students observed quietly, noticing the dramatic change in the stern professor's demeanor as he earnestly pleaded with Gray to consider transferring to the magic department. Looking at the situation through his own eyes, he believed the world would miss out on something great if Gray chose not to follow the path of magic. In fact, he felt it would almost be an offense against the art itself. Despite the overwhelming praise directed at him, the young man found himself chuckling at how ridiculous the situation was. He suddenly recalled that he had encountered the phrase ether compression technique at some point in the past. The boot camp was bathed in sunlight, as usual, while a hero led a class. She recounted stories from earlier times when no one was aware of the existence of OD or life force. Because of this lack of understanding, performing accurate magic became a significant challenge. To produce the intended result with a spell, a person needs to keep concentrating ether inside their own body. However, this outdated approach only manages to collect a small amount of OD. Bella, who was known as Miss Lecturer, and destined to become the greatest sage and most powerful mage, looked back at her magical training from 10 years prior and couldn't help but find it amusing. Gray turned to the professor and inquired whether the name OD was familiar to him. The old man found himself completely baffled by the question, realizing that the term was entirely foreign to him. Based on the response, it appeared that society had yet to uncover this groundbreaking magical idea during that era. Given those circumstances, the fundamental techniques Gray picked up while with the subjugation squad could be viewed as insights borrowed from the future. At last, he understood the importance of keeping this kind of information secret and knew he had to be cautious not to let it slip. One more time, he turned down the repeated suggestion to switch to another course. His heart belonged to the way of the sword, so he needed to succeed. The professor, realizing he had no other choice, gave a weary sigh and resigned himself to the young man's unwavering commitment to using blades. However, he also gave Gray the freedom to move into a different apartment whenever he wanted. Sensing the onset of a headache, the young man managed an uneasy expression of gratitude toward the lively old man who had made such a kind offer. Following the demonstration, the two students returned to their places as instructed. The professor assured everyone that he would no longer scold Gray in the classroom. He even mentioned that he would not object if Gray decided to leave whenever he lost interest. The professor considers these elementary lessons much too simple for someone as gifted as Gray. Gray had once walked down the stairs, feeling the weight of unfriendly stares upon him. Now, as he climbed back up, both the professor and his classmates looked at him with newfound respect. At the same time, the person he had targeted remained on the shattered stage. His cheeks grew warm as his heart pounded rapidly with admiration for Lord Gray. Gray couldn't see his expression from where he stood, but an unmistakable coldness crept up his spine, making him shiver. Once the initial lecture concluded, he found a handwritten message from Professor Ariel, inviting him to visit her office when classes were over. Without any warning, he suddenly found himself being called forth. The situation could become complicated if the unexpected unexpected call was orchestrated by the elderly Professor Carlos. After a brief search through the hallway, he eventually spotted the office door adorned with a symbol of the all-seeing eye. He was about to raise his hand to knock when the door quietly swung open by itself, silently inviting him inside. Interpreting the open door as a welcome, Gray stepped inside with courtesy, offering polite salutations as he entered. Just as he was about to complete his thought, he became aware of a swift blade slicing toward him from the side. Gray reacted on instinct, swiftly unsheathing his sword to shield himself from danger. Although his hold on the weapon wasn't traditional, it proved effective when the situation demanded quick action. He managed to deflect both the sudden assault and its perpetrator with swift action. After knocking the attacker aside, Gray became aware that his actions had been driven solely by instinct this time. He had planned to face the attacker head-on, only to realize it was a young woman with blue hair, struggling to hold the sword in her grasp. When Gray examined her more carefully, he recognized her instantly, recalling that she was someone he was very familiar with. Despite her small stature, she would one day stand as a steadfast foundation of hope and strength for all of humanity. Gray's gaze shifted toward the desk positioned at the rear of the office. The woman seated nearby acknowledged his swift reaction with admiration. Professor Ariel felt a sense of satisfaction, realizing that her judgment during the entrance exam had been accurate when she evaluated the young man. Two additional men occupied the room alongside Ariel. They were also professors and remained unconvinced about the latest member joining the Divine Eye. While they silently acknowledged that Bella's technique appeared perfect, they couldn't ignore how quickly her sword had been disarmed. As soon as the name was mentioned, memories from Gray's past life as a powerful mage surged into his mind. No one could have imagined how unassuming the sorceress appeared during her youth. At the same time, Ariel presses her coworkers, urging them to stop making excuses and simply acknowledge their mistakes. Ultimately, the rest of the professors reluctantly gathered the money and handed over the winnings to their colleague, who struggled with a gambling habit. The group noticed the brief interaction at the doorway and realized that Gray's presence was intentional. Feeling bewildered and uneasy, the young man tried to understand the situation, questioning the reason he had been summoned. Ariel casually revealed that the group was wagering on the new student's ability to defend against an unexpected ambush from Bella. As a result of this little gamble, she ended up earning a decent profit that day. As a gesture of gratitude, she handed over part of her prize money to the student she had just begun teaching. He swiftly snatched the coin from the air, discovering a shining gold piece resting in his palm. For him, even one gold coin represented a considerable amount of wealth. Despite acknowledging their loss in the bet, the other professors pointed out an obvious flaw in the entrance exam that had initially escaped their notice. From their earlier interaction, it became clear to them that the young man had intentionally refrained from using his stronger arm to protect himself. He behaved as though he were shielding an arm that couldn't move. The most probable reason for that unusual trait seemed to be a past injury. Instead of showing any obvious harm to his muscles that even a teacher would easily notice, the boy was dealing with a much more profound kind of pain hidden beneath the surface. A minor wound alone could not explain the sudden, tense reaction in the midst of such an unexpectedly aggressive attack. Gray felt a sense of astonishment upon realizing that the professors had accurately inferred so much simply from observing the way he unsheathed his blade in preparation to protect himself. They held positions as educators at the top academy for good reason. Although their observations came after Ariel's, they still managed to piece together an accurate understanding of the situation. After collecting their money, Ariel quickly sent her colleagues on their way. They had lost their chance at something special, and she had no intention of letting Gray slip through her fingers. At this point, the professors were more than willing to acknowledge the student's promising abilities. If Gray's injury fails to recover and instead worsens over time, he will always be remembered as the student who couldn't meet the academy's expectations, yet was still allowed in. He felt uneasy about the sharp, menacing way the professor spoke. After the doubtful professors left the office, Ariel stayed behind with just her students. With all distractions now removed, the true purpose of the gathering could finally begin. She reached out to him earlier that day, intending to talk about the subject of magic. Once Professor Ariel had poured fragrant tea for everyone, she recounted the events she had learned about from Professor Carlos' class. She had learned the truth directly from the man in question. That stubborn fool had barged into her office, insisting that the new student be moved to the magic program. Unsurprisingly, she refused to entertain such an absurd demand. Through her intense gaze, Gray transformed into a far more frightening creature in her mind, brandishing a sword instead of relying on spells. She took off her monocle, preparing to explain her previous statement in more detail. Gray stood in shock, realizing that Professor Ariel did not recognize any extraordinary talent for magic compression in him. The professor failed to notice even the slightest indication that Gray had delved deeply into the study or practice of magic. Gray experienced a wave of discomfort after being thoroughly examined by that strange, all-seeing eye. He realized that trying to deceive it would serve no purpose at all. Gray confessed that everything she had guessed turned out to be true. Driven by curiosity, she softly inquired whether he might reveal the method behind creating the black hole ether bullet. In return for this precious knowledge, she assured him of her secrecy and offered him a reward. She felt a strong urge to learn more about this exciting idea, hoping it would be helpful for Bella. As Gray enjoyed a cup of tea, he nearly let the future title of the young Bella slip from his lips. Professor Ariel regarded the young woman as a true prodigy in the realm of magical theory, admiring her remarkable intellect, even though she lacked the ability to practice the spells she imagined. For reasons that remained a mystery, she was completely unable to perform ether compression, and the legendary technique known as super compression was even further out of her reach. Relying on vague information he had picked up from the future, he understood that Bella developed her abilities later than most. He reasoned that her apparent struggles with practical skills could explain this delay. After learning that had narrowly survived an encounter with a super compressed ether bullet, Ariel arranged the meeting. She hoped to discover a method for utilizing super compressed ether that didn't rely on the wasteful process of compressing it internally, believing such an advancement could revolutionize their field. Professor Ariel searches anxiously for answers, determined to prevent any of her students from being handed over to Professor Bradley. In the years to come, that dreaded name would be recognized by all. No one could remain ignorant of such a notorious and despicable individual. He carried out numerous unauthorized experiments on people, determined to push the boundaries of his research, and in doing so, took the lives of many. In addition to everything else, he unleashed devastating magical catastrophes that ended up taking the lives of countless thousands. Professor Bradley held the notorious title of the most dangerous magical criminal in recorded history. At this point in time, the unhinged sorcerer responsible for countless deaths and acts of terror remained at large, eluding capture. By the end of the year, Bella needed to successfully produce highly compressed ether, or else she would be forced to meet with the unhinged professor and face a dangerous operation. Most people with sound judgment would recognize this as an unwise choice. Professor Ariel wholeheartedly shared the same opinion. Despite claims that the surgery aimed to improve magical skills, she recognized it as nothing more than obvious human experimentation, shrouded in uncertainty. Although the news had not reached the public, she was already catching whispers about the madman's monstrous deeds. There were victims who had lost their lives, and others who survived only to be shattered beyond repair. Bella added her thoughts, explaining that even though the situation was risky and frightening, she faced expulsion by the end of the year unless she managed to achieve something. Professor Ariel secretly wished that her student would abandon both magic and the academy entirely, believing it would be better than allowing that lecherous man to interfere with Bella's well-being. Gray considered his options in silence, aware that the magical knowledge he held was far beyond what currently existed. He realized that revealing such revolutionary information could dramatically alter the flow of history. He observed as Bella, still so young, tightened her fists, unable to hide her mix of fear and frustration. Gray's mind replayed the final seconds he had spent confronting the liquidator. He recognized those feelings of frustration, fear, and despair all too well. In his past, he had been nothing more than expendable, prepared only to be defeated quickly. She could only watch in despair as the very heroes meant to protect the world were cut down mercilessly, their bodies falling like pieces of butchered meat. Aware of the grim fate that awaited him if he remained passive, he wondered why anyone wouldn't try to alter the path of history. The bleak future that so many dreaded seemed far better off transformed. When he drained the last drop of his tea, he had made up his mind to do his best in teaching Bella. She would soon be able to handle super compressed ether with ease. Once the meeting concluded, the trio made their way toward the arena, their path illuminated by the fading light of the setting sun. Gray pulled out the chalkboard and did his utmost to explain the lessons he had absorbed during the boot camp lectures. After recalling everything he possibly could, he instructed the girls to keep this confidential information to themselves. Information security was ensured by the professor, who had prepared a magical contract in advance. Anyone daring to violate the agreement would face fatal consequences. Once Gray finished explaining everything, he turned to the others and waited to see their reactions to the theory he had just presented. Simply discovering the idea of OD left Professor Ariel astonished. Yet the magical information that was unveiled to her seemed even more unbelievable. Bella admired how concise and structured his explanation was. To her, it seemed as though she was attending a futuristic lecture on magic, filled with knowledge from centuries ahead. As Bella listened intently, taking in the overwhelming flood of information, it felt as though the progress of magical history had leapt forward by an entire century within those four walls. She couldn't help but marvel, repeatedly expressing her amazement at how much magic had advanced in just that moment. Gray had only mastered these fundamental ideas from the adult sorceress a decade in the future, which truly highlighted her extraordinary intellect. Professor Ariel found herself overwhelmed overwhelmed by the sheer volume of information, unable to fully understand or assess it. Recognizing her own limitations, she chose to rely on the exceptional abilities of her young magical prodigy. Bella guessed that the theory was likely correct based on her calculations. She noticed that all of its ideas fit well with the established magic theory that powered their world, with nothing out of place. The most efficient method to confirm their suspicions was to experiment directly, which was the reason they had taken control of the arena from the start. If the theory was correct, then the spell that Bella had hastily created on the spot ought to be effective. With both hands gripping her staff, she relied on the guidance Gray had given her and summoned every bit of strength she possessed. That situation seemed far from favorable. If his memory served him right, rumors claimed that Bella's power could reduce an entire city to ashes within seconds. With such overwhelming force, she was nearly as dangerous as a weapon of mass destruction. She had a reputation for struggling to manage the intensity of her formidable magic. He believed that today would be the moment he finally saw her renowned show of overwhelming power. Bella herself could hardly believe what her own foot had sent flying. A massive burst of intense flames erupted from the center of the arena, surging upward and disappearing into the sky above. Gray had attempted to dissuade her from pursuing such a reckless plan, yet his warning came too late. The young mage positioned themselves at the base of the towering pillar of flame, supporting a grand and formidable magic circle above. In his previous existence, he had reached the very summit of magical strength, wielding a force that surpassed all others. Had Bella not seized command of the spell just a moment sooner, the flames would have consumed him completely. The skillful control of the elements ended up being the very thing that kept him alive. Unaware of the anxiety surrounding her, Bella radiated happiness. She had accomplished her goal at last, uniting her knowledge and skills through real-world action. Summoning every ounce of determination, she intensified her efforts and began to gain control over the blazing column of fire. Transforming the energy, it took on the form of a blazing dragon, its jaws open wide as if letting out a powerful roar. For the very first time, she discovered that using magic could actually be enjoyable. Caught up in the excitement, she pushed herself too hard and soon ran out of energy. As the flames faded away, she immediately sensed the consequences of her experiment when her ether stores were completely depleted. Her strength vanished, causing her to faint. As she collapsed, the staff slipped from her grasp and clattered onto the ground alongside her. Concern filled Gray as he hurried over to the girl who had fainted, while the professor calmly advised him to relax. Bella's sudden collapse resulted from a typical bout of ether exhaustion. With some rest, she would quickly recover and regain her full strength. Gray felt his concerns ease after hearing that. Even Ariel found herself amazed by the incredible magical abilities the young woman demonstrated. Ariel realized that, after grasping a new idea, perhaps no one else could wield magic of such magnitude. Lost in a drowsy haze, the mage, half asleep, softly muttered that the true brilliance lay not within herself, but within the theory itself. Gray handed her a device designed to help her generate super-compressed ether with ease. In reality, this invention was something she was destined to create herself later on. Ariel let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, feeling a wave of relief wash over her. The dangerous operation with that mysterious underworld doctor was no longer necessary for Bella. Ariel felt more than ready to handle Bradley's troubles on her own, even if it meant giving him a piece of her mind. The professor felt a sense of relief and happiness watching the young mage steer clear of making disastrous choices. She felt a deep relief knowing her magical abilities remained intact, untouched by any unauthorized experiments. Bradley's infamous procedures, while known to boost magical power, often stripped individuals of their ability to control it. No one quite understood the process behind these surgeries, but it seemed probable that the deranged doctor had discovered a method to forcibly shatter a person's natural restraints. At last, it became clear to everyone why people in the previous world had whispered that the sorceress was a dangerous force, like a weapon that no one could control. The remarkable advancements made that day could not have happened without Gray's assistance. With the completion of their agreement, both parties had met their obligations. Now, the professor needed to carry out the duties outlined for her on the enchanted parchment. To begin with, she assured him that she would address the issue with his arm. Among her collection of spells, there was one that could potentially offer a solution. She reached out, and from her gesture emerged a swarm of shimmering butterflies, each one crafted from ethereal light. She soared through the arena with her student, softly placing her hand on theirs as they moved together. When the two touched, the surrounding ether began to churn and spiral, gathering intensely at the exact spot where they met. For a brief moment, Gray allowed the comforting sensation of the healing touch to wash over him without resistance. After the incident, he clenched his wounded hand and immediately noticed how much more comfortable it felt than it had before. He regained the ability to use his dominant hand, marking a significant step forward in his recovery. Feeling Feeling a surge of gratitude, he expressed his sincere appreciation to the professor, relieved that one of his greatest challenges had finally been resolved. Despite the mysterious nature of his wound, no ordinary healing potion could mend it. However, her gentle touch succeeded where magic failed. She confidently claimed that her nerve-restoring abilities far surpassed what any typical healing potion could achieve, considering them incomparable. Before things went any further, she needed to confirm that he had fully recovered. To check this, Gray was instructed to pick up a sword and give it a swing, testing his strength. After what felt like ages, he finally rested his strongest hand on the handle of his sword. He swiftly unsheathed his sword and made a relaxed, effortless slash. Almost immediately, he became aware of a troubling sensation, even though his arm was said to be completely healed. To test his suspicion, he crouched into a fighting position and mimicked the familiar swings of his sword, paying close attention to how his body responded. He noticed with frustration that his right arm no longer moved as smoothly as it once did. Professor Ariel had anticipated an outcome like this. Although she had flawlessly restored the young man's nerves, her magic was powerless to mend the deeper injuries within his spirit. When she brought up the subject of the soul, Gray found himself puzzled. Although modern magical studies have yet to confirm the presence of the human soul, Ariel remains steadfast in her belief that it is real. She was able to perceive it clearly, thanks to the unique ability granted by her extraordinary eye. Beneath the glittering monocle lay an all-seeing eye, capable of piercing through any disguise. At this moment, she observes Gray's soul gradually mending on its own. She believes that, provided he avoids pushing himself too hard, his recovery will happen without intervention. He wondered aloud whether practicing his sword skills might be considered overexertion, but the professor assured him that it was not. The professor explained that he was free to continue his training as usual. Instead of focusing on that topic, she inquired about the type of swordsmanship he used, curious how it could inflict such deep wounds on a person's soul. The concept of wielding a sword powered by the user's very soul had existed long before. She actually knew someone else who shared this rare ability. Amy White, also enrolled in the Divine Eye Special Admission Program, came to mind. The teacher suspected there had to be some sort of link between these two particular students. Gray felt unsettled and puzzled, unable to understand why Professor Ariel would have such thoughts. In this timeline, he had not yet met the person destined to become the future sword saint. Ariel guessed that Gray was familiar with Amy, judging by his sword technique. The way he handled his weapons suggested he had been taught by that sword enthusiast. Upon further reflection, the professor became aware of a few subtle distinctions. He realized that the individual who had taught him swordplay seemed to be a much more advanced and talented version of young Amy. She believes that, given a few more years, Amy will match the expertise of the person who once trained Gray. Amy's knack for analysis is intimidating, as her sharp eye catches subtle details and her mind deciphers them with impressive accuracy. Gray explained that his swordsmanship skills came from training at his local dojo, a statement that wasn't exactly false. Still, he realized he had to steer the conversation elsewhere before he accidentally revealed too much. Returning to the topic of wounded spirits and the art of sword fighting, it became clear that typical methods could never truly link these two elusive ideas. From her research, she already knew that Gray possessed a hidden technique powerful enough to take down not just an ogre general, but an entire army and their surroundings with a single strike. Because of Gray's unbelievable achievement, the wager she had made with Young during the entrance ceremony had become an effortless victory for her. Ariel examined the remnants found at the site, marveling at their remarkable beauty. She realized that even the finest magical techniques for cutting could not match the unmatched accuracy and deadly effectiveness displayed here. The enigmatic force residing inside Gray had somehow inflicted harm upon his very soul, and she was able to perceive this damage with her own eyes. Ariel gazed intently, her vision piercing deep enough to glimpse the very essence of his being, where she noticed faint traces of power seeping out from behind a chained door. When she spoke those words, he found himself convinced. In his thoughts, he repeatedly imagined a door bound by chains. It was clear that no amount of guessing would uncover the truth. The woman before them possessed genuine skill. Despite this, Ariel had previously witnessed abilities that resembled Gray's own. Although the match wasn't exact, the overall feeling they gave off was strikingly alike. Feeling intrigued, he wondered aloud whether others possessed strange abilities like his own. She remembered someone who matched the description, though she still felt uncertain about whether that person was truly human. Professor Ariel had given it the name Liquidator, referring to the very entity responsible for bringing about the world's downfall. Judging by how he responded, she realized the boy was already familiar with them in some way. Gray Gray felt overwhelmed as thoughts raced through his head. He wondered why the liquidator had come up so soon in the sequence of events. The alluring professor was caught off guard by the young man's surprising knowledge of such a mysterious entity. However, considering his knowledge of advanced magical theories from the future, it wasn't all that shocking. Gray experienced a sense of discomfort as others praised him for the groundbreaking theory, knowing all he had done was repeat the insights he learned from the true mastermind. Ariel, her curiosity piqued, questioned him to find out just how much information he had about the person known as the liquidator. He admitted to himself that his understanding was limited, yet he felt sure that the liquidator posed a grave danger to all of humanity. The group realized that the creature needed to be stopped before it could grow any stronger, believing it was something that had to be eliminated at all costs. Ariel thought that his position was a bit over the top, yet she couldn't deny that the liquidator was somewhat risky. Despite her concerns, it was clear that Bradley was determined to keep pursuing his experiments with the liquidator. The looming disaster that threatened the future appeared to have a connection with the notorious figure known for terrorizing the world with forbidden magic. To Ariel's knowledge, the liquidator is the exact entity that Bailey and Bradley are attempting to call forth. Gray had never heard this information before. The beginnings of humanity's adversary had always been kept from him. Reflecting on the past, it became clear that the Academy had stood at the very heart of historical events in the previous timeline. The people in charge behaved with complete confidence, giving the impression that they could predict the liquidator's next location. It seemed highly likely that the World Union Academy had been involved in calling forth the liquidator from the very beginning. Both the professor and the mysterious first-year student realized that the dangerously daring experiment needed to end before things spiraled out of control. The person overseeing the experiments held a tenured professor position, making it impossible for Ariel to intervene or halt his research. She had previously attempted to persuade those in charge to take action, but her efforts were ignored. She regretted that her position prevented her from sharing further details with just a student. Ultimately, without directives from higher up, there was nothing anyone could do to halt Bradley's reckless actions. Gray had intended to learn the names of those in charge at the Academy, but for the time being, that possibility was off the table. He soon realized that the Academy's chain of command was even more complicated than he had imagined. If he managed to demonstrate that Professor Bradley posed a real threat as a criminal, the group might finally gather enough evidence to make a difference. In the timeline before, forbidden experiments resulted in the deaths of tens of thousands of people, and Gray possesses knowledge of the exact locations where these tragedies are destined to occur. There seemed to be no risk in letting Professor Ariel in on this information, and by doing so, they might be able to apprehend the culprit in the very act. She immediately dismissed the suggestion, knowing that sneaking into a professor's research lab at the Academy without authorization was viewed as a serious offense. The group considered how they could gather solid evidence through safer methods that wouldn't put them in danger of being jailed. However, the situation could shift dramatically if Gray managed to present convincing proof at that very moment. Since the initial concept could not proceed, they realized they would need to set it aside for now. Ariel seemed to recognize the risks involved, yet she found herself constrained by the rules and political maneuvering within the Academy. Although this situation was exasperating, it also made sense given the circumstances. She was especially eager to explore the secrets behind Gray's strange abilities. With a hint of excitement, she suggested that there could be a method to master that dangerous force. At the Academy, a certain professor had earned a reputation for being an expert in handling mysterious and unexplained phenomena. Solving Gray's case was exactly the kind of challenge that Professor Longfellow enjoyed most. Gray recognized the name. Longfellow was renowned as the mentor of the Sword Saint herself. His reputation had reached legendary status. Ariel anticipated that the suggestion would intrigue the young man. She assured him that she would set up a one-on-one training session with the stoic professor for the following day. Gray accepted Ariel's help with appreciation, knowing that his main purpose for enrolling at the Academy was to learn how to control this ability. He was surprised to stumble upon a promising clue so soon. For the first time in a while, he felt hopeful about the situation. The following day, Gray ended up standing near the strict professor. Longfellow had already begun giving him his first private lesson. Ariel wasted no time getting started. Gray had braced himself for grueling drills or complicated lectures, yet Professor Longfellow had whisked him away to the forest, where the two of them now dashed around in loops. They remained within the boundaries of the Academy zone, now surrounded by dense, leafy woods. As he wondered why they were running without direction, Professor Longfellow reprimanded him for his lack of focus. The professor insisted that, rather than daydreaming, he ought to move faster. According to Longfellow, they needed to run harder and push themselves as far as possible. Longfellow holds the conviction that the soul's true strength emerges only after all physical energy is exhausted. Gray is not allowed to handle his sword until he has completely depleted even the smallest reserve of his stamina. The young man remains unaware of the full situation, yet he has unwavering faith in its approach. Meanwhile, as he continues to run laps, secretly conducts unnatural experiments in an attempt to call forth the arbiter of the end. The persistent thought lingered in their mind, refusing to be ignored. Gray bears the weight of his ability to see the future, and this heavy responsibility is beginning to hinder his progress. Despite the difficulties, he continued following the training schedule for a whole week. When the 7th day arrived, he received instructions to return and meet with Professor Ariel. Gray experienced a twinge of embarrassment, realizing that his training mostly consisted of non-stop running, with only a small portion dedicated to practicing sword techniques. Despite this, he noticed a modest increase in his physical strength. Ariel let out a soft, entertained laugh, fully aware of his unusual ways. After the report ended, a messenger stepped quietly and respectfully into the office. He passed over a sealed envelope bearing Professor Ariel's name. She quickly accessed the message, her face gradually contorting with each line she read. When she finished reading the letter, a chill ran through her, leaving her motionless in her chair. Gray noticed something was troubling her and expressed his concern. Without saying a word, she passed him the letter so he could read it on his own, believing it was best for him to discover the contents directly. Letter had been penned by Bradley. Upon receiving news of Bella's remarkable supercompressed ether discovery, the unpredictable man dismissed the claims. Despite the apparent similarities, he argued that the young mage had not truly reached the accomplishment described. For this reason, he declined to acknowledge her newly reported skill. As a result, the agreement for surgery stood firm, and the procedure would continue as planned. The message, outrageous in tone, had come from a master at provoking anger. The situation had spiraled into madness, leaving Ariel seething with anger. Bailey and Bradley appeared intent on claiming Bella as their next test subject. He pressured her to undergo a risky and pointless operation. Sadly, he held complete control over the situation. The agreement that Bella had entered into through magic left no room for loopholes or escape. Unless Bradley personally cancels the agreement, Bella faces a difficult decision. She must either accept expulsion or submit herself to the will of a deranged individual. Gray would not tolerate such nonsense, and Ariel agreed with his stance. The letter sparked a sense of urgency in her, pushing her to take action without worrying about official procedures, and she realized she would need Gray's assistance. She needed to uncover where Bradley's hidden laboratory was. Although the plan was dangerous, she felt determined to reveal Bradley's crimes and invalidate the unfair agreement. At last, she was ready to take bold action herself. Gray realized this was exactly what he required. With a smug attitude, he questioned her decision to reconsider, pointing out that accusing another professor without concrete evidence was an extremely dangerous gamble. They had already moved beyond following the rules. She now relied on Gray, trusting him to keep another of her cherished students safe. Right from the beginning, she had sensed with her keen eye that this moment was inevitable. Ariel finally realized that Gray had been honest all along. It wasn't until after receiving a ridiculously unbelievable letter and spending some time in denial that she came to accept the truth and fully understood what was happening. Gray prepared to take charge, relying on insight gained from knowing what lay ahead. Working together, they prepared to expose the villain's horrific acts for the world to see. The dark swordsman was back. From what he understood, the sinister laboratory remained concealed somewhere in the mountains close to the village of. Professor Ariel dimly remembered hearing that another faculty member had received permission to set up a laboratory in that location. The academy had given official approval to those unlawful and cruel experiments. No location rivaled the remote mountains for secret scientific experiments. Hidden away in this isolated region, he could remain for extended periods without attracting a hint of suspicion. Additionally, the professors at the academy uphold an unspoken agreement that prevents them from getting involved in one another's work. However, as long as they manage to collect proof that crimes against humanity are taking place, they would not be held accountable for trespassing. As the group talked about their strategy, Bella arrived and tapped on the door, prompting Ariel to open it and welcome her inside. She had only moments ago opened a letter bearing dreadful news. A wave of hopelessness crashed over her, leaving her emotions swirling in confusion and sorrow. Professor Ariel swiftly took the letter from Bella, promising her that the situation would be resolved no matter what. Ariel seemed determined to take on Bradley alone, but Bella refused to let that happen. Wearing a self-assured grin, she claimed that taking on that guy alone was something she could easily handle any day. The anxious young woman glanced at Gray with hope in her eyes, silently urging him to step in. He volunteered to accompany the professor, taking a decisive step forward. Gathering her courage, Bella offered to join the group as well. Determined not to depend on others, she felt it was important to face her own challenges. Ariel believed she was capable of relocating on her own. She cautioned the others, explaining that was not only an experienced professor, but also a dangerous man with little concern for the safety of others. There was no way to predict how he would react if he discovered a novice student interfering with his schemes. Realizing her responsibility as the adult in the situation, she knew she couldn't put these young people in danger. Gray considered the situation and believed that going alone would only increase the risk. He was confident that, if necessary, he could draw upon the same strength he'd used before afford to defeat an ogre general. He was determined not to be a burden to anyone. If Ariel were to encounter any trouble, the Divine Eye program would surely be shut down, which would mean Gray and the others would be forced to leave. He wished to influence what lay ahead, longing for the power to shape both his destiny and theirs. Ariel noticed the unwavering resolve in their eyes and realized she had no choice but to agree. It seemed as though, no matter how firmly she tried to stop them, they would find a way to show up anyway. She decided she would only accept making this a group mission if her one specific requirement was met. Regardless of the situation, they understood that ensuring their personal safety was the most important thing. Gray and Bella quickly agreed to the condition without hesitation. Once they finished taking necessary precautions, the trio set out and made their way into the eerie hills of the mountains. Hidden from plain sight, Bradley's vast and secret laboratory unfolded before them. No one could easily picture the terrifying events unfolding behind those immense, looming walls. The main goal of their mission remained clear. They needed to collect proof of illegal actions, with no other tasks or distractions involved. Gray's eyes burned with anger as he assured everyone they had arrived at the correct location. Meanwhile, Bella experienced a wave of nervousness, uncertain whether their plan would succeed smoothly or face unexpected problems. Professor Ariel had completed her assignments ahead of time. At this moment, Bradley was supposed to be attending the Magic Society's conference. That meant the laboratory ought to be empty of presence. However, the likelihood remained high that numerous traps protected the main entrance. To avoid unnecessary risks, it would be wiser for them to break through the side wall and create a new way in. Despite the fact that sneaking into a lab approved by the Academy was already illegal, Ariel knew that the method they used wouldn't make a difference. The crime remained the same. Before going any further, she offered Bella a final opportunity to reconsider and turn back if she wished. Clutching her staff with determination, she pushed her uncertainties away. She wondered whether the professor was truly prepared to endure so much difficulty just for her sake. Gray interrupted the conversation to explain that their mission had a greater purpose than just helping her. He emphasized that thwarting Bradley's wicked schemes was essential for the good of everyone. If they failed to act, he warned, many lives would be lost, and the entire world would face terrible consequences. Professor Ariel thought his explanation was somewhat overblown, yet she conceded that the troublesome creature needed to be dealt with. Bella needed to relax and stop overthinking, because she wasn't the only person in need of help. Once the introductions were finished, Ariel took charge, pulling Bella with her as she hurried forward, while Gray matched their pace, sprinting beside them. When she arrived beside the immense laboratory wall, she quietly cast a spell that sparked a blaze. Several fiery blasts shot through the concrete, leaving nothing to slow their destructive path. The explosion burst across the mountain, flooding everything in a harsh, brilliant light. Even the most skeptical observer had to admit that the professor truly had a flair for dramatic displays. Gray was the initial person to glance through the sudden opening. The sight that greeted him sent a shiver down his spine. Spread out before him stretched a shadowy corridor, its walls flanked on either side by rows of endless prison cells. Within the confines of those cells, severely undernourished individuals remained shackled, their minds broken by relentless torment. A few appeared lifeless, while others suffered the loss of limbs, blood seeping from untreated, festering wounds. They had anticipated discovering something eventually, but the speed at which it occurred caught them off guard. Evidence appeared before them so quickly that searching for proof became unnecessary. The group made their way down the lengthy corridor, passing cell after cell, each one occupied by someone who had fallen prey to Bradley. Up to this point, Ariel had discovered evidence of 14 forbidden spells cast on the captives. That information by itself was enough to prove guilty of major crimes. The numerous and obvious violations of human rights found in this location did not even need to be brought up. Before long, the group discovered an enormous chamber situated at the heart of the laboratory. The ground was stained with layers of both dried and wet blood. In the middle of the room lay a dark, foreboding magic circle. Its appearance resembled a sinister altar. Their first objective had been simple: slip inside, gather solid proof, and make a clean escape. However, witnessing the suffering around her, the compassionate young sorceress couldn't ignore those imprisoned within this nightmarish place, and felt an urgent need to save them. Gray sensed an uneasy feeling creeping over him, realizing it was unsafe to remain there much longer. He understood that waiting for help would be futile, as a rescue would take far too much time. The possibility of coming back made the situation even more urgent. Before the group had a chance to decide what to do next, a pale apparition slowly appeared from the shadows. He approached the group with an unhurried pace, moving as if the space belonged solely to him, much like a stroll in his own secluded garden. Professor Ariel instantly identified the man who was slowly slowly approaching them. There stood Bradley, notorious for his wild experiments and infamous looks. Many believed he carried himself with an air of importance, as if some invisible force surrounded him. Gray wasted no time unsheathing his sword, bracing himself to face any dark actions might attempt. Bradley proudly revealed that he had sent an impersonator to attend the conference instead of himself. He believed this was necessary, as he was close to making an important discovery in his research. The man proudly claimed he had acquired exceptionally fresh supplies for a significant ritual. He preferred experimenting on his human subjects while they were still alive and uninjured. Upon finding Professor Ariel and her cherished students waiting at his door, he chose to abandon his original intentions and quickly devised a new course of action. Ariel's concern for her students weighed heavily on her mind, while Bella stood frozen in place, gripped by a deep instinctive fear. Meanwhile, Gray's fists clenched, prepared to leap into action at the slightest provocation. The outcome of tonight's experiment could be greatly improved if the chosen materials held stronger magical abilities than those typically found in ordinary people. Remained baffled by how the group had discovered his personal torment, yet he felt certain they were acting in secret. This secrecy convinced him that none of them had revealed their destination to anyone else. No one would have any idea where to search if they all disappeared at once. No one would suspect true intentions, no matter how sinister his plans might be. The atrocities he had committed seemed almost secondary compared to the unsettling grin he wore. A smile so chilling it alone could warrant a death sentence. Judging by the tone of Professor's sinister words, it was clear he was eager to use them as experiments, willing to drive the limits of magic further, so long as they paid a high cost. Because the secrets had already been revealed to them, their survival could not be permitted. He decided it was best to take full advantage of the magical abilities they possessed. As delivered his elaborate speech, he suddenly noticed a gigantic fireball hurtling toward his protective dome. The spell erupted in a burst of flames, filling the dried-out room with a sudden, brilliant light. To everyone's astonishment, it was not Professor Ariel who launched the attack. The message originated from Bella, who would one day become a renowned sage. Observing her resolute face, it appeared that any traces of her earlier anxiety had vanished. A surprise attack of this level, however, proved to be ineffective. Just as danger approached, managed to shield himself by conjuring a barrier at the very last moment. Despite everything, he acknowledged the girl's remarkable promise and bold decision-making. He credited Ariel's keen perception for uncovering such outstanding ability. In the past, he had never truly noticed the unique students brought in through special admissions. He considered whether it might be wise to pay more attention to the other recruits in that disputed group. Despite the attempt, it was impossible for an ordinary academy student to succeed in assassinating a professor. The difference in their abilities was simply too great. Overcoming her anxieties, Bella decided that taking action, even if it meant violence, was preferable to losing her life. However, she narrowly lost the opportunity. Concerned about her students' safety, Ariel commanded everyone to fall back. With the necessary proof already in their possession, she believed the academy could manage the situation from there. Professor had no intention of allowing their escape. As soon as they tried to move, the crazed professor unleashed a searing wave of dark energy from her scepter. In response, he set his sights on Bella, making her his main focus. Bella froze in place, her wide eyes reflecting surprise and fear, much like a startled deer. Ariel reacted swiftly, positioning herself to absorb the force of the assault using her glowing shield. Despite the ongoing presence of dark energy, she concentrated intensely, reinforcing the barrier with all her strength. With an air of arrogance, insisted that any attempts at using defensive magic would be useless against the consuming power of the gluttony flame. This accomplishment stands out as a valuable result from his many years of dedicated research. The incantation summons a hungry fire that not only scorches barriers of magic, but also consumes them, using their power to grow even stronger. The spell was considered flawless in concept, making it impossible to defend against. However, the caster needed to obtain scarce biological ingredients, which was its sole limitation. While described the situation, Ariel's protective barrier shattered and was swiftly devoured, causing the gluttonous flame to swell in size and grow even more uncontrollable. She attempted to resolve the problem by calling upon the power of her divine eye. By drawing on that enigmatic energy, she managed to gain just enough time to create a new protective shield. As the initial barrier collapsed, the next shield absorbed the full force of the powerful forbidden magic. Ariel's second barrier quickly gave way, dissolving into nothing as the hungry flames consumed it almost instantly. Worried about what might happen, she quickly threw a pouch containing spell memories toward Bella and Gray. She believed that if spotted the pouch, he would understand exactly how to handle the situation. Rather than grabbing the evidence and fleeing, Bella responded by conjuring a protective shield around herself. A wave of panic washed over Ariel. Although she had come to terms with the possibility that her journey might end here, she refused to let her students face the same fate. Despite her exhaustion, Bella felt unwilling to abandon her professor during the fight, knowing she still had some energy to keep going. Ariel recalled the commitment the group had made prior to embarking on this mission. They had all decided that, should anything go awry, ensuring their own survival had to come first. The strange nature of magic was undeniable. With her protective spells weakening rapidly, Ariel realized her only option was to stall for as long as she could. During a heated exchange with her student, the protective barrier she had maintained eventually shattered. She sensed the backlash from her spell collapsing, and Bella immediately stepped in to handle what was left undone. The shimmering shield she conjured held its own against the fierce strength of Gluttony Flame. Bella studied its offensive move and realized that its power alone wasn't particularly formidable. She determined that a unique form of defensive magic would be enough to neutralize it. Watched in disbelief as his flames suddenly froze in midair, nearly causing him to lose control. He knew that only a handful of experts understood the behind this spell, so he couldn't fathom how an ordinary student had managed to unravel its secrets. Bella casually explained that a certain important person had shown her a new theory not long ago. Thanks to this, she now found it much simpler to understand every spell. Teetering on the edge of defeat, suddenly snapped and unleashed his wild side. He suspected that a close confidant had turned against him and insisted on learning who the betrayer was. With a look of pure innocence, she playfully hid the truth about who her mentor was. The person who first introduced Bella to the wonders of magic was simply a fellow student enrolled in the swordsmanship program. He took his time explaining some outlandish concepts related to magic, and thanks to Bella's natural brilliance, she was able to connect all the dots with ease. Meanwhile, found himself falling right into a trap designed to provoke him. The veins on the man's arms stood out so much that it seemed like they might burst at any moment. The character wondered if anyone had ever been provoked so intensely that they resorted to using a mysterious, blood-stained crystal in hopes of making their attack even deadlier. He squeezed the blood-stained crystal in his palm until it shattered. The imprisoned human souls surged forth from within the object, intensifying the blaze of Gluttony's fire. By now, the flames resembled a living creature rather than a simple magical incantation. Although actions could be seen as offenses against both magic and mankind, the spell he conjured dazzled with its impressive appearance. Bella believed that her barrier would be able to withstand the pressure for a little more time. She possessed the ability to keep this standoff going forever in theory, yet her supply of mana would soon run out. Even at her peak, she might only be able to hold on for another minute. Ariel, already occupied with defending, realized she needed to take on more responsibility when it came to attacking as well. With the power of her divine eye, the red-haired professor focused intently. Ariel observed the way the magic moved and noticed a place where the fire looked weaker. She realized that if she managed to send her mana beyond the shield, she could possibly escape. She summoned vibrant streams of magical energy, allowing them to weave effortlessly through the sturdy shield that surrounded Bella. Ariel could see an unobstructed line from where she stood to, giving her a perfect opportunity to take a decisive shot. Her delicate strands of mana lacked the strength needed to break through the hungry, consuming fire. Their presence gradually faded away, diminishing little by little until they vanished entirely. Found amusement in the feeble effort to fight back, mocking the attempt with laughter. Gray recalled that Professor Ariel was known for having some of the least effective attack spells among all the teachers. Her true talent was in a different area. Now that the fire had absorbed her already limited offensive abilities, she would be even less effective in combat. The group needed to come up with a solution and end the situation as soon as possible. Bella began to lose her energy, and her footing grew unsteady. Her hands trembled as she struggled to maintain control, knowing the barrier could collapse at any moment. Ariel had urged her students to escape earlier for exactly this reason, having run out of every other alternative. The moment arrived for Gray to step forward and shoulder the responsibility himself. Bella wondered how he could cause any harm, given the raging storm of intense magic separating his sword from. Gray confidently dismissed the challenge, certain that victory would be his. Professor Ariel sensed Gray's intentions and cautioned him not to rely on his enigmatic power once more. She explained that activating it prematurely might cause permanent damage to his healing arm, or even put his life at risk. Despite everything, it seemed preferable for one person to face death alone rather than for all three to perish together. After all, their concerns were unfounded. The main character burst through the flames of Gluttony, revealing a fierce red glow that shone on the opposite side, catching attention. The final image that registered in the deranged professor's mind was Gray unleashing a flawlessly swift strike, its path stained unpredictably with the professor's own blood. While his mind struggled to comprehend the shocking turn of events, his severed head lay apart from his lifeless body. In that single moment, Professor Bradley met the justice he deserved for the countless offenses he had committed. The man responsible for carrying out his execution would soon alter the path of history.